The feeling of being alone is something we can all relate to. So how is this reflected through a character who embodies this very trait? Yes, this week we have another very highly requested character analysis, the Primera Espada Coyote Starrk. Think about how it must feel like to be so powerful that you begin to envy the weak, due to the struggle of finding companions who are as strong as you are. How lonely it must be for Starrk, who holds the highest rank but with nobody who we can consider as an equal. Let's look at why Starrk has come to believe in what he does, and how this affects his actions throughout his brief appearances in the series. Before the video begins, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications to not miss any of my future uploads. Starrk first appears in episode 138 of the anime and in chapter 229 of the manga. He has wavy dark brown hair along with greyish blue eyes. The remains of his holomask consist of the bottom of a jaw which appears on his neck. He is the first ranked Espada within Aizen's army, meaning that he is the strongest Espada. Starrk is lazy and unmotivated. He is the first ranked Espada, but he is very willing to let the second ranked Baraggan take up leadership, which is shown in chapter 318 during the Fake Karakuratan battle. He spends most of his time asleep and doesn't invest much interest in being violent or arrogant like the other Espada. During his battle with Shunsui, he is very observant of all the battles going on around him. For example, in chapter 361 he comments on the other fights that are going on. He appears to be impressed by Hitsugaya's Bankai and asks Shunsui if all the captains have such an ability. As with all the other Espada, he too has an aspect of death. Starrk is assigned to represent solitude, which consequently reflects through how he behaves and what he says. To understand why he resonates with the feeling of loneliness, we need to take a look back at his backstory, which we learn through chapters 374 and 375. In chapter 374, during a flashback, we see Starrk state that he is alone. In his final moments after he is defeated by Shunsui, he recalls how he envied the weak. He was left alone when all of his companions had their souls diminished due to being around him. Due to his loneliness, he split his soul in two, forming his partner Lilynette. He questions how his original form would have been like, asking if it would have resembled either of them. However, he does know that that form caused him to feel loneliness which he needed to escape, and this is the reason why he divided himself in two. He envied the weak because when you are weak you get to stay with the pack, and together you are stronger than being alone. Even if it wasn't possible for him to be weak, he just desired for a friend who was at least as strong as he was. In chapter 375 we see Aizen approach Starrk and Lilynette, questioning if they took down the pile of hollows which lay in front of them, but Starrk tells him that they just died on their own. Aizen compliments him by telling him that he seems strong. He also states that he is looking for friends, which Starrk replies by saying that he too is looking for friendship, but only if they are strong. Aizen assures him by telling him to come with him to find out, to which he agrees. He is impressed that Aizen could remain around him without being killed. He recalls his first meeting with Aizen after he is cut down by Shunsui. He spends his final moments apologizing to Aizen as he was not able to repay him, as he thinks to himself that he is not alone anymore, considering the other Espada and Lilynette as his companions who saved him from a lonely existence. He lastly recalls his first meeting with Lilynette after they were divided into two. They exchange their names with each other as she asks him where he is going, to which he replies anywhere, and offers that they both wander together for as long as can be. We can tell by the way that Kubo draws her smiling that she seems to accept his offer, as we see Starrk bloodied and cut down by Shunsui as he falls to the city below. Lilynette also dies along with Starrk. Kubo sometimes draws sketches or doodles at the end of his chapters, which piece together and tell a short story. We see an example of this with a short story from the end of chapter 372 to 376, which includes 5 pieces of art. The first shows 2 wolves. The next piece shows one of them being hurt through an injury. The third picture we see the remaining wolf mourn over the other's death. In the fourth picture, both of the wolves are seen to be dead, and the final picture shows 2 splatters of blood, which I think represents their bodies returning to nothingness. This little story represents the connection that Starrk and Lilynette shared, and beautifully confirms that they died together after Starrk was cut down by Shunsui. Starrk is so powerful that it results in him being alone. When he meets a person as strong as Shunsui, he asks before his death why he has to fight someone as strong as him, inferring that he would have gotten along with him and not fought if they met under different circumstances. The first time we see Starrk really speak and interact with someone is in chapter 269, when Lilynette rudely wakes him up to inform him that Aaroniero has died. However, he tells her that he already knows. When she tries to prompt him for any further words, he replies with, "What do you want me to do?" He has what appears to be a sad or a somber expression while he says this. It may be because he feels indifferent with the loss of his companion, or he actually does care and he feels upset that he lost a comrade. It could be either one. Maybe he's feeling cold and careless, or deep down he is hurt, which is reflected by his somber expression. This struggle to understand his response is clarified when he reacts to the death of Baraggan in chapter 371. Both Harribel and Stark seem to acknowledge his death. Stark comments saying that number 2 has died, but Aizen hasn't said a word in response. He expresses his disappointment in Aizen, showing that he does care for the lives of his comrades, but his lazy nature prevents him from taking any action in the form of revenge, as he states that it isn't his style. In his past, Stark was so strong that weaker beings around him were overwhelmed by his strong Ryatsu, causing them to die. Anyone who came close to him ceased to exist. When Orihime tries to heal Kenpachi after his battle with Nnoitra, Stark unexpectedly appears. He apologizes and says that he typically doesn't like to do stuff like this, as he tells Ichigo and Kenpachi that he has to borrow her. He is so quick that he appears and disappears before either Kenpachi and Ichigo have an opportunity to stop him. Stark has a cool and calm personality. He is one of the more likable Espada, and well, one that I feel many can relate with and find similarities with. Everyone, especially during this lockdown, has been forced to feel an aspect of solitude or loneliness. We can understand the effect that being alone can have on one's character and the decisions that they end up making. Stark just seeks to remedy his loneliness. His lack of enthusiasm for carrying out Aizen's orders revealed that he isn't evil. He is someone who just wanted friendship. When he first arrives in fake Karakura town, Baraggan decides to take up the leadership role, to which Stark doesn't have a problem with. He really didn't care for Aizen's ambitions or for anything else really, but he was grateful to him for allowing him into the Espada. Despite being the strongest, it didn't cause the other Espada to die just by being in his presence. It is unfortunate that he had to join Aizen's army, which ultimately led to his death. He would have made for a great reformed character if he stuck around and wasn't killed. Stark battles against Shunsui during the invasion of fake Karakura town. Not only does Shunsui physically resemble Stark, they also have a very laid-back approach. It is very entertaining to see two very similar characters fight against each other, when deep down they would really prefer not to fight with each other. This is shown in chapter 329 when Shunsui asks Stark to send Lilinette away, as he cannot battle without holding back while she is there, but Stark tells him not to worry as he won't fight at his best either. They can just play around, he says. And what he says next is so similar to many people that I know I cannot help but to smile when I read his words. Stark elaborates and says that this whole situation is against his nature. If it was up to him, then they would pretend to fight while letting the others do all the hard work. The similarly natured Shunsui agrees and tells him that he would prefer to do that also, but not this time. Stark then draws his Zanpakuto and their battle begins. In chapter 335, Stark proves to be very observant and analytical, as he comments on Shunsui's second blade which is still sheathed. Shunsui uses the excuse that he only draws his second shorter blade when it is difficult to use his katana, but Stark tells him that he has observed he has the ability to be able to use both of his hands with his blade, meaning that he is ambidextrous, also adding that he is quicker with his left hand than he is his right. Shunsui is indeed a dual blade wielder, dismissing Shunsui's obvious lie that he only draws his second shorter blade when it is difficult to use his katana. He asks Stark if he will take their battle seriously if he wields both of his blades, but remaining consistent with his lazy attitude, Stark prefers if he doesn't, as he is already strong enough. Shunsui decides to unsheath his second blade in defiance. In another instance, Stark once again proves how great he is at analyzing his opponents when he learns how Ukitake is able to absorb an enemy's attacks and fire them back, thus explaining how he fired Stark's Sero back at him. In chapter 339, Shunsui guesses that Stark is the second ranked Espada, but he reveals that he is indeed the Primera Espada. Shunsui is not surprised by this, confirming that his battle will not be won easily after all. They both are evenly matched as Stark requests to see Shunsui's Bankai after he is impressed by Hitsugaya's Bankai. He calls over Lilinette as he merges with her, transforming into his Resurrection called Los Lobos, which translates into the Wolves. This causes Shunsui to activate his Shikai. In this form, Stark wields dual guns and fires Seros from them, contrasting against the dual blades that Shunsui is wielding. He keeps insisting to Shunsui to activate his Bankai, but unfortunately he is convinced not to by Ukitake. After Wonderwise appears and surprises everyone, Stark begins to battle the Vizards, Love and Rose. They wonder if Stark will battle out of revenge due to the loss of Baraggan, causing him to be emotional, and it appears that he has indeed been affected by the loss of his comrade, as Love states that he is slower than before after landing an attack on him. Stark realizes now that none of this matters anymore, as Aizen has no intention of helping them. He confirms that his opponents are tough, when he seems to be slightly bothered by the death of Aaroniero, but most notably he is impacted by the death of Baraggan, and Aizen's response to it, or lack of response really. I guess this death was more significant compared to the deaths of the other Espada, as Baraggan was one of the top 3 Espada. Stark must have assumed that Aizen would have felt a loss if one of his best had died, but as he learns, his leader couldn't care less, which causes him to no longer want to continue fighting. Not that he was incredibly motivated to in the first place. He realizes that Aizen will not help them, his opponents are too strong, and if this continues, he knows someone else will die. Here he challenges his beliefs of loneliness, as instead of going back to Nab, he listens to Lilynette and agrees to continue fighting so that no more of his comrades are killed. Lastly, in the end, he realizes he was not alone. In chapter 374, he begins his flashback with "I am alone," and in chapter 375, before his death, he realizes that he is not alone anymore. Shunsui looks at Stark falling to the ground with a very somber expression. I think he too would have preferred not to have killed Stark, as Stark points out several times Shunsui is behaving in ways which are not like him. For example, in chapter 362, when Shunsui attacks him from behind and even attacks him while in mid-conversation. Also in chapter 363, when Shunsui tries to surprise attack him once more by cutting off his head from behind. It may well be a stretch to say this, but it was probably foreshadowing Stark's death, as Shunsui from the beginning agreed with Stark that typically he would prefer to have pretended to fight while the others do the hard work, but not on this occasion. This is the first instance he behaves uncharacteristically. Stark even expresses his disappointment at Shunsui's resolution to defeat him. You can see this in Stark's response with his change in attitude and how he says that it is regrettable that he has chosen to defeat him, despite agreeing with him earlier by saying that he has a similar nature to him. The surprise attacks seem to genuinely try to take Stark's life, which conflicts with Stark's expectations of Shunsui. After the second surprise attack, Stark tells him to stop it because it isn't like him, but Shunsui tells him that he shouldn't tell him how he is like, as he behaves however he wants to. This seems to disappoint Stark, as he thought that they were alike, clearly showing that Stark was interested in the similarities that they shared. Shunsui defeats him, but not without feeling like he behaved out of character. He defeated an Espada who would have preferred not to have been there, a similar feeling that Shunsui too experiences throughout the series due to his own laid-back, lazy tendencies. This is why I believe he looks on with a somber expression as Stark dies. Stark's first name is Coyote. Now when we compare his name to the animal that he is named after, we can draw upon some similarities. Coyotes are known to travel and live in family packs, but it is more common to see one hunting and traveling on its own. Coyotes who spend a part of their life on their own are called solitary coyotes. This can be due to a number of reasons, such as being separated from their family when they are young, or they leave their pack to search for a mate to start a new pack. I believe the coyote in his name is in reference to a solitary coyote, a lone traveler. His released form has an ability which materializes a pack of wolves, which may represent his longing to be a part of a pack. His ability is a reflection of his solitude, his desire to also travel in a pack, which is represented by the name of his resurrection, and his ability to call upon a pack of wolves which are a part of him. It is a small detail which may or may not mean anything, but I choose to interpret it as a nuance which adds depth to his character. Baraggan is the former king of Huecamundo, a prideful hollow who desired to rule over all hollows. He gained this position through leveraging his abilities and powers that are centered around the inevitable natural cause of death, old age. He follows a philosophical doctrine that is inspired by the fact that all beings who experience life are doomed to an inevitable fate, which is death through growing old and frail. Baraggan is a very interesting character, and in this video I want to try and understand him, through his motives, how he embodies his aspect of death, and his relationships with the other Espada and Aizen. Baraggan first appears in chapter 244 and in episode 145 of the anime. At first glance he appears to just be an uninteresting old man. He has the typical white hair and wrinkled skin. He has a scar running down the right side of his face and one on the left side of his chin extending to his neck. Baraggan is broad and muscular despite his age, and dresses like royalty with his white leather coat which is lined with black fur. To add to his royal appearance, he also wears a pointed crown on his head, further adding to his sense of self-importance. He is arrogant and condescending, referring to those who oppose him as mere ants. His sense of pride causes him to impose his will and authority onto others. Like in chapter 318, when Aizen is trapped, he immediately takes up the leadership position, even going as far as to challenge Harribel and Stark if they had a problem with him taking the lead. Baraggan is the second ranked Espada. Even within Aizen's army, he isn't worthy of being number 1. At first glance, assumed that he was the strongest amongst the Espada and would be ranked number 1, as he appears to be the most experienced Espada. and thus understandably he would have more power than the others. In actuality, he is second to the younger, lazier Starrk, who couldn't care less for his rank within the Espada. I'm sure that this must infuriate the egotistical Baraggan to know Starrk is considered better than him. Baraggan was dethroned by Aizen and was further humiliated by assigning him with a lower rank than his self-pride could bear to tolerate. To understand Baraggan, we need to go over his backstory so that we can understand his relationship with Aizen, who he follows and acts under throughout the story. The backstory of the second ranked Espada is told to us in chapter 371, which is titled Kingdom of Hollows. We learn here that prior to joining the Espada, he was the unchallenged king of the Hollows, the king of Hueco Mundo. He ruled over the realm from his palace, Las Noches. He was incredibly bored as he had an army of Hollows but nobody to defend himself against or to attack. In his boredom, he is approached by Aizen, Gin and Tozen, who recognize him as the king of Hueco Mundo. He welcomes their intrusion into his palace, as he states that if they didn't arrive, he was about to split his army into two factions and make them fight against each other. In a dismissive manner, he welcomes them to his castle, Las Noches. Tozen remarks that it is strange to call where he resides a castle as it has no walls nor a roof, but Baraggan tells him that he does not require a roof as the sky of Hueco Mundo is the king's roof. Aizen asks him if he is satisfied with his current position and form. He elaborates by asking him if he has ever questioned the state of the world and ever desired to rise to new heights beyond that which he has attained. Aizen offers his aid to grant him greater power to lead a new world on the condition that the king of Hueco Mundo obeys him in return. Baraggan laughs at this proposal and even questions his use of the terms a new world and greater power. He insults Aizen by calling him an ant. He reiterates that he is the king of Hueco Mundo, hence the king of the world. His arrogance leads him to say that there is nothing greater than he is. The only new world that can be created according to Baraggan is the one that he creates. He orders his Hollows to attack Aizen and company, but he swiftly tears them apart, much to the king's surprise. Aizen understands the world that Baraggan controls and rules over. He calls it ironic that the king of Hueco Mundo and consequently the Hollows appears as a large black figure wielding a large weapon. He states that he looks similar to the Shinigami, who are the destined enemies of the Hollow. Baraggan is dethroned by Aizen and made to serve under him. This causes Baraggan to develop resentment towards him. At the end of the flashback, he thinks to himself he will kill Aizen with his own hands. He will make him regret that he ever gave him power. He is absorbed by his ego. He states that he is a king and a god. Notably, he also says that he will never die, which is a point I will come back to later on in the video. His belief that he will live forever leads him to affirm to himself that he will hunt Aizen down for all eternity for the ridicule he has bestowed upon him. Baraggan embodies the most natural and pure aspect of death, which is senescence. The inevitable condition whereby the physical body deteriorates with age is described as aging. The power of cell division is reduced gradually over time. This limits growth and causes the body to weaken and become frail over time. This degenerative condition occurs in all organisms. The difference between aging and senescence is that there is no reference to death when describing aging. Senescence, however, is the stage of development where the symptoms which present themselves are those which are near to the death of an organism. His aspect of death is reflected in his ability called Respira, which he uses in his resurrection form. This ability causes him to release a black and purple mist which causes anything that it comes into contact with to rot. The rotting will spread across the body until the affected portion of the body is amputated. The ability is so effective that it decays the flesh, and all that remains is skeletal remains and clothing. In chapter 369, he states that all living things will eventually die, and that the things that they create will also die. He himself fell victim to his own aspect of death in the end, and was defeated by his own power. His appearance as a Hollow is unique and convinces you that he is the king of the lowly realm of Hueco Mundo. Physically, he appears as a skeletal figure, which represents the true form of humans under the layers of skin, flesh, and muscle. It is symbolic of death. Outwardly, he appears dead, but inwardly he perceives himself to be an eternal god. In chapter 318, Baraggan proves himself to be analytical as he deduces that Karakura Town has been swapped by a replica that is being maintained by pillars located below them. He orders his Hollows and Fraction to destroy the pillars, as it will save them going to the Soul Society if Karakura Town is returned back to the real world. Baraggan doesn't appear much in the series, but he is present during the battle in Fake Karakura Town, where he battles against Soifon and the Vizard Hachi. In chapter 355, Baraggan is unimpressed by Soifon and a lieutenant, who are proving not to be a challenge for the Espada, as they are exhausted due to their prior encounters. Soifon has difficulty landing an attack on him, as he reveals that each Espada has an aspect of death, and his is senescence, caused by aging, which is a product of time. He can manipulate the time span of objects by simply touching them. He demonstrates this by causing the bones in Soifon's arm to grow old. He then activates his resurrection by using the word decay, which is appropriate to his character. His released form is called Arrogante, which is Spanish for arrogant, and in Japanese it translates to Great Skull Emperor, a term that once again fits with his character. He approaches Soifon and unleashes his ability Respira, which makes her arm rot away to a bone. She is forced to cut her arm off before it spreads further across her body. Baraggan muses to himself as it appears that even Shinigami are afraid of death. Soifon activates her Bankai and fires a projectile towards the Espada, but despite the huge explosion, Baraggan appears through the smoke unscathed. Hachi arrives to aid Soifon, but the Espada proclaims that they are helpless against his power. Hachi tries to lock away Baraggan and his power with a Kido barrier, but it appears that his ability can even rot away Kido, stating that it is foolish to assume that Kido cannot grow old. Hachi continues to generate barriers and recites an incantation which creates a giant barrier that separates the Espada from them. Baraggan is caged, which allows Hachi and Soifon to devise a plan to stop him. Soifon, using her Bankai, fires the attack once more towards Baraggan, but this time he is caged and unable to divert the blast away from himself like he did before. He survives the attack but is badly injured. He refers to his opponents as ants and swears that they will not get away with what they have done. Chapter 370 is titled Discussing Life from God's Perspective, as Baraggan demands that they repent to him for disobeying the Great One. He proclaims that they will turn to dust. Like a wrathful god, he intends to strike them down. He refers to himself as the god of Huecomundo, which is interesting as it is an example that fits with Aizen's speech to Shinji about how men become kings and kings become gods. The Espada's prideful boasting about how great he is consumes him. He refers to his power as the one absolute in this world, referring to everything else as small and insignificant in comparison to it. He states that to be under his supreme power is the proper order of the world. Nobody is considered to be an equal to him. Baraggan points at Hachi as Respira attacks him and covers his right arm, rotting it. He tells the Vizard his life is comparable to the life of an ant in his eyes. After he stops his self-absorbed gloating, Hachi appears to have transferred his deteriorating right arm into Baraggan's stomach with the use of a barrier. Hachi repeats Baraggan's words, confirming that his powers are the only absolute in this world. Based on this logic, then not even the god of Huecomundo can withstand such a power. Respira, his own power, begins to deteriorate him. It was a gamble, but it appears to have paid off as the number 2 Espada becomes enraged with the Vizard, calling him an ant and looking down upon him till the very end. Before he fades away, he throws his axe towards Aizen in a final futile attempt at taking his life. His weapon rots before it reaches Aizen, as the god of Huecomundo too deteriorates into nothing. Hachi comments that he found it strange, despite his power rotting whatever it touched. How is it possible that Baraggan was not affected by it, considering he was a skeleton and it wouldn't take much effort to reduce his form to dust? He deduced that he must have a coating on the surface of his body which repelled the effects of his own ability. If this proved to be true, then the most effective way to defeat him was to insert his own power into his body via Hachi's rotting arm. He remarks that despite having a power that represented the absolute truth of the world, Baraggan was ironically a small creature who too feared death and did what he could to drive away his old age. He was killed by senescence through his own power. There are many ironies to the king of Huecomundo's existence. He was dethroned yet called himself a king. He called himself a god despite not being eternal. His power was to deteriorate life from objects and beings, yet he himself was withered and frail. He was the closest to death and most afraid of it, despite ridiculing others for being afraid of it. He constantly called others ants, yet he is referred to as a small creature by his opponent who bested the self-proclaimed Great Emperor. Volume 43 of Bleach features a poem which elaborates upon Baraggan's character. Decay is my friend, night is my servant. I wait for you in a palace of elm while I let the crows peck at my body. From my interpretation of this, Decay is my friend is in reference to his power, Respira, which aids him in battle. The night that is my servant is in relation to Huecomundo, which is the realm of darkness, the literal night. It is his servant as he is the king of that realm, with its inhabitants serving him. I wait for you in a palace of elm is in reference to the palace Los Noches, which is surrounded by elm trees, which in Celtic mythology are associated with the underworld. We can further interpret elm through its symbolism, as it is a tree that represents war and hope. The wood from elm is linked in mythology with death and the transition to the underworld. The wood from elm trees is also traditionally used to make coffins due to its durability, and the last verse, "I let the crows peck at my body," is in relation to a decaying corpse being feasted upon by scavengers. This poem seeks to tell us about Baraggan's intrinsic relation to death. He ruled over a world of nothingness, surrounded by reminders of death in his palace, all the while having a vessel which appears to have been pecked away at by scavengers. He was the nearest to death, which makes him the perfect embodiment of senescence, as he presented with symptoms common in those who are nearing the end of their life. He reminded others of their inevitable deaths, yet never accepted his own mortality. Calm, observant, and analytical are a few words to describe this week's character. Harribel is the first female Bleach character to be analysed on my channel. I found it fitting to begin with the only female Espada, aside from the former Espada Neliel. She is caring towards her underlings, but she has an impulsive tendency to react aggressively when she is not treated with respect or double-crossed. Let's examine her relationships with her Fraction and Aizen, her behaviours during the Fate Karakura Town arc, and how this all leads up to her final appearance, which I believe leaves more to be desired. Harribel first appears in chapter 198 and in episode 138 of the anime. She has short blonde braided hair, green eyes, and a tanned skin tone. Her Arrancars jacket is a unique variation which appears to cover her mouth down to her chest, leaving her abdomen exposed. The remnants of her holomask seem to cover the lower half of her face down to her chest, and she conceals her mask under her jacket. She is the third-ranked Espada, among the strongest and best of Aizen's underlings. In chapter 282, we see Harribel along with her Fraction. They are observing Ichigo and Grimmjow battling. She prefers not to get involved, rather choosing to watch the battle closely. She even comments if Ichigo really is a human, as the intensity of his battle with Grimmjow is making her feel like she is witnessing a battle between two Espada. In general, she is calm and reserved, choosing to not speak much. She is caring towards her Fraction, appearing to be very protective over them, as we see her emotionally affected when she realizes their spiritual pressure is fading during the Fate Karakura Town battle. In chapter 318, we see that Harribel respects Aizen as a leader, as she reprimands Baraggan for doubting Aizen's capabilities, due to becoming trapped within the head captain's wall of flames called Jogaku Enjo. Harribel briefly appears within this series, so I will try to present as much as I can about her character through the moments we experience with her. It is not stated how or when Harribel joined the Espada in the manga, but we do know that she is a loyal follower of Aizen, to which she has her reasons. We learn in the Nestle Tonight short story that was written for Bleach Databook 3 Unmasked. The primary reason for Harribel joining Aizen was so that the constant fighting between holos would cease within Hueco Mundo. It appears that the presence of Aizen and the Espada in Las Noches seemed to prevent the holos from fighting amongst each other. Kubo wrote Harribel's aspect of death to be sacrifice. In the anime, we get a filler backstory for Harribel during episode 284, which helps to explain her chosen aspect of death. We see Harribel in this flashback as a Vastolorde class holo resembling a shark. This is in reference to a Zanpakuto called Tiburon, which translated from Spanish means shark. We see her saving Apache from a male holo. She is then introduced to Mila Rose and Sunsun. The backstory explains how she met her future Fraction. She decides that it would be better if they stayed together, as female holos are outmatched by the male ones. Sometime later, they battled with a holo who managed to escape the encounter with them. Harribel lets it get away. Apache wonders why she spared its life. Harribel states that she does not want to become stronger by sacrificing others. Her resolve is that if she cannot win on her own, then she will resort to winning within a group. Harribel and her underlings are attacked once more. She tries to subdue the holo that is attacking them. It is apparent that this holo's Reiatsu is more powerful than the Vastolorde class Harribel's. She is adamant to protect her subordinates. She demands them to get away. They leave but choose to return due to their respect for Harribel, deciding to give their life fighting beside her. The holo proves to be too strong and states he decided to kill her so that he may reach the heights of the strongest individuals within Hueco Mundo. However, the holo's plans are cut short as Aizen arrives, saving Harribel's life by blocking the final blow the holo was about to deliver to her. Aizen kills the holo and commends Harribel, stating that the power of sacrifice allows for the impossible to occur. He tells her that if she doesn't want her underlings to become victims, then she needs to gain power. Aizen offers to give her the power she requires to protect them. Similarly to the other Espada, Aizen presents her with the offer of joining him, to which she agrees. We see this flashback prior to Aizen betraying Harribel. He justifies his actions by stating that even if he allowed his subordinates to continue battling with the Gotai 13, their sacrifices would mean nothing. He is referring to his Espada not being strong enough to battle with their opponents. He ridicules his own underlings by stating that he is surprised that he alone is stronger than all of his Espada. This angers Harribel. This is because she is disgusted by the disrespect that Aizen shows towards the Espada, despite them having given their lives and sacrificed themselves for their leader. Earlier, I mentioned in the flashback that we see Harribel clearly state that she does not want to grow stronger through the sacrifice of others. She says that she would prefer to grow stronger within a group. This is a contradiction to Aizen's approach to gaining strength. He has manipulated and sacrificed numerous of his underlings for his own selfish desires. who are made up of 3 females known as the 3 Beasts. Harribel believes that you are stronger together rather than being alone. This explains why she's been their leader for so long. Each of her Fraction have a lot of personality and character. Pachi is impulsive. She has a short fuse which leads to her being very confrontational. She believes in Harribel's strength and is confident that she cannot be defeated. Mila Rose is more level-headed than Apache, but she can become frustrated by insults called to her by the others. She is seen enjoying inflicting pain onto her opponents during her battles. She does argue with the other Fraction but would give her life for them, as seen when the 3 Beasts take on Kilgay Oppi during the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Sun Sun is the most calm out of all of Harribel's Fraction. She often advises the others to stop their bickering and arguments because it reveals how weak they are. Harribel and her Fraction take part in the Fate Karakura Town battle. She notably faces off against Captain Hitsugaya. Her Zanbakudo is my favourite amongst the Espada, particularly the stylish way that she draws it prior to clashing with her opponent. In chapter 334 their battle begins with Harribel noticing that Hitsugaya has been affected by the sudden appearance of Momo onto the battlefield, once again affirming her predisposition to be observant and analytical. After Harribel's Fraction are defeated, she unzips her Arrancar jacket, revealing she is the 3rd Espada. She begins to demonstrate her true strength, forcing Hitsugaya to activate his Bankai. However, in chapter 355, we see Harribel disappointed by the strength of a captain. She is surprised her Fraction were defeated by them. She then activates her Resurrection. As Hitsugaya comments, it doesn't appear that she has gotten stronger, but he decides not to underestimate her. Harribel, who now resembles a shark, delivers a seemingly fatal blow to the Ice Dragon. Just as Harribel sets her eyes on Head Captain Yamamoto to avenge the death of her underlings, Hitsugaya reveals that she attacked a frozen clone of himself, stating that this trick would have only worked on her once, and he did so in order to understand the speed and range of her attacks. During her battle, we see that she has the ability to control water, to which Hitsugaya believes that he can use and manipulate by freezing it and using it against her. However, Harribel reveals she too can manipulate his abilities through her boiling ocean steam. Both of them are waiting for the battlefield to fill with moisture so that they can deliver their final blow. Hitsugaya reveals that his Bankai is the ultimate cryo type and that all of the clouds in the sky are within his control. Harribel is shocked as she stares at the dark storm clouds in the sky. Hitsugaya asks for her name. As they exchange their names and ranks, he encases her in ice. He apologizes to her for not allowing her to avenge the death of her comrades. Harribel is freed by Wonder Wise's high-pitched scream which breaks the ice that is holding her. She then battles Hitsugaya and the Vizards Lisa and Hiyori 3 against 1. That is until Aizen becomes impatient and attacks her, which I mentioned earlier. The main ability of Harribel's Resurrection is water manipulation. She can create and manipulate this element through the gill marks on her blade, which resemble a shark's gills. The shark-inspired form is activated with the command Destroy. Now in the manga, we are left with the supposed death of Harribel at the hands of Aizen, but like I mentioned before, Databook 3 Unmasked reveals that she survived despite being severely wounded after Aizen's attack. How she survives is explained in the short story included in the databook called Nestle Tonight. We learn that Karakura Town, which was located in the Soul Society, is switched with Fate Karakura Town in the real world by Captain Mayuri. The wounded Arrancar were also transferred to the Soul Society. It is Orihime who heals the Arrancars and even Harribel, as she has deep wounds which need immediate attention thanks to Aizen's Zanbakudo. It is stated that her injuries were so severe that it would have resulted in her death if Orihime did not arrive to heal her. After she is healed, she returns to Hueco Mundo with her Fraction and sees the destruction of their home after the numerous battles that took place there. She realizes that with Aizen gone, the fighting between hollows would occur once again, citing that this was the reason why she followed Aizen. She is concerned by this prospect, as without Aizen it is inevitable that the hollows of Hueco Mundo will begin to be disruptive now. Her Fraction advise her, now that Baraggan and Aizen are no more, she should take their place and rule over Hueco Mundo as its queen. She disagrees but does indeed become the default ruler of Hueco Mundo. If you hadn't known about Nestle Tonight, then it may have come as a surprise to you to learn from Nell's brother Pesce in chapter 486 that Harribel is still alive. After the deaths of Stark and Baraggan, it was Harribel who fell next in line to rule over Hueco Mundo. We learned that Hueco Mundo was invaded and Harribel was defeated by Uwatch himself. He holds her captive while taking control of Hueco Mundo, using it as a foothold to invade the Soul Society. We don't really know what happened to Harribel within the manga, but her fate is revealed in the Can't Be Your Own World novels, which state that she survived and is still the ruler of Hueco Mundo. When it comes to her character arc, this is all about change, which is observed through the progression of the story. By observing the personality, actions and values of the character, you can compare them from the beginning to the end of the story. John Truby in his book The Anatomy of Stories states that true character change involves a challenging and changing basic beliefs, leading to new moral action by the hero. Harribel from the very beginning does not believe in gaining strength or power by stepping on others. This is a moral value she holds dear to herself. She believes that if she cannot become stronger alone, then she will accept becoming stronger within a group. From the beginning to the end of the story, this remains the same. She holds true to her values and acts on them. We see this when she is forced to challenge Aizen, who betrays her and everything that she stands for. She is challenged here by someone who holds no value for strength in numbers, or appreciation of sacrifice. She is angered by Aizen's blatant disregard for his underlings. She is forced to take action by retaliating against Aizen, a new moral action, as she raises a blade against someone she felt that she could trust and would lead her into a new world. Aizen attacking Harribel, the one who represents sacrifice, is so meaningful. She literally gains her resolve through valuing the sacrifices of others, while Aizen blatantly disregards the sacrifices of his Espada. He does this by stating that he is stronger than all of his Espada. It is this that angers Harribel to the extent that she attacks her leader. The Espada died fighting for Aizen. Most of them were directionless or lost before Aizen arrived and offered them to follow him. There was an element of trust that they had in him. If they didn't trust him, then I doubt they would have been willing to fight for Aizen to the point of losing their lives for this purpose. It is the perfect contrast of values to have Aizen finally lose his patience by attacking the one Espada who valued that which Aizen was so ignorant to. Harribel otherwise remains true to herself and her ideals and is only forced to change her stance on Aizen when her values are challenged by his lack of remorse. If you stuck around till this point in the video, then I'd like to thank you for making it to the end. Harribel appeared very briefly in this series, so it was a welcomed challenge to try and understand her character through each appearance that she makes. I stated before that her last appearance left more to be desired. This is because it should have been revealed at the end of the final arc if she survived or not. It's one of my criticisms of the last arc due to how it glanced over certain battles and didn't mention the fate of several characters, of which Harribel is included. Imagine a character who finds no meaning in anything, who cannot relate to anyone's emotions, even his own allies. However, due to lacking emotion, he is able to carry out orders precisely, without any conflict, which is caused by the distracting nature of feelings. The character I described is one of Tite Kubo's most consistently well-written characters, Ulquiorra Cifer. I want to analyze how Kubo writes this character to be so detached from what is considered to be a human, but he ironically ends up becoming one of the most human villains in the Bleach universe. Let's try to understand why Ulquiorra is one of the most memorable villains in anime, and how he is affected by the events of the story, which ultimately lead to the growth of his character. Ulquiorra makes his debut in chapter 190 of the manga and in episode 113 of the anime. He was the very first Espada designed by Kubo. In his debut, he arrives in Karakura town due to orders from Aizen to assess if Ichigo is a threat to the Arrancars. In his first appearance, he is accompanied by Yammy. This reminds me of when Vegeta and Nappa arrive on Earth in Dragon Ball Z. Similar to how Nappa blows up the city that they land in, Yammy sucks out the souls of the nearby civilians. Comparing the similarities between both of these introductions, we learn that the larger of the two is the more impulsive and short-tempered. In our first impression of Ulquiorra, we see him casually unzip his jacket to reveal a hollow-like hole on his throat, while the menacing Yammy towers behind him. What makes this moment so memorable is the shock on the faces of Ichigo, Yuzu, Chad, and Orihime, as they sense incredible spiritual pressure, while even Yoriichi, Urahara, and Isshin are alerted to the arrival of the Arrancars. From Ulquiorra's responses, we see that he is a calm and level-headed individual, as he reiterates their orders to Yammy that they have arrived to kill only one individual. He states that there are only 3 people with high enough spiritual pressure to put up a fight against them in the human world, and the rest of the inhabitants he describes to be garbage. This clearly proves Ulquiorra is the type to come well prepared before carrying out orders, as opposed to the thick-headed Yammy. The pairing of Yammy and Ulquiorra serves as a great introductory contrast to emphasize the difference in their personalities. Yammy's obnoxious behavior clashes with Ulquiorra's well-planned intellectual approach, as Ulquiorra advises Yammy to develop his pesquisa so that he can detect if an individual has a high spiritual pressure for himself, instead of annoyingly bothering him. Ulquiorra looks down upon those with low spiritual pressure by calling them garbage. He directs this insult towards Chad and even Ichigo after he assesses he does not pose a threat to Aizen. Ulquiorra always has a somber expression on his face, which hardly ever changes. He has green eyes with a slit-shaped pupil, which resembles a feline's eyes. Like I said before, his hollow hole appears on his throat in his first appearance, but this was later amended by Kubo to be located in the middle of his chest, which is more in line with Ulquiorra's interest in the feelings derived from the hearts of humans. He is the 4th ranked Espada, with his number displayed on the left side of his chest. Ulquiorra's character is written with plenty of depth, which allows us to really delve deep into analyzing his beliefs, behaviors, and development throughout his iconic appearances within Bleach. His most notable interactions occur with Orihime, as she serves as the heartfelt counterpart counterpart to his heartless, cold, and indifferent nature. Ichigo also finds himself conflicting with Ulquiorra, who questions why he is continuing to battle him when the odds are not in his favor. The usually calm and composed Ulquiorra is infuriated by Ichigo's persistence in the face of despair, which shows how he has a predisposition to respect the laws of strength and power, hence why he readily insults those who are weaker than him by calling them trash, which explains why Ichigo infuriates him, as this so-called trash has the nerve to challenge Ulquiorra and continues to stand before him despite being thoroughly beaten up and outmatched. Ulquiorra is a cruel taskmaster. In comparison to the other Espada, he is given the most instructions by Aizen, indicating that he has a lot of faith and trust in Ulquiorra to carry out his bidding. His first instruction is to kill Ichigo if he determines him to be a threat to Aizen's plans in the future. The second instruction is the capture of Orihime, and the final order that is given to Ulquiorra is to protect Las Noches, while Aizen leads to invade Karakura town. When Orihime refuses to eat any food, and after ordering her to eat fails, Ulquiorra resorts to threatening her, as he considers forcing the food down her throat if she does not willingly eat, as it is her duty to remain alive and healthy for Aizen. This shows that he has the capacity to inflict cruelty and turmoil onto others without hesitation, but would prefer not to get his hands dirty by resorting to these methods. I didn't know this prior to researching for this video, but outside of the manga, Tite Kubo wrote a backstory for Ulquiorra, which was published in the third Bleach character data book titled Unmasked. Let's analyze his past and try to understand why Ulquiorra thinks and behaves the way that he does. Ulquiorra's past is told to us via 11 pages, which are poetically written and illustrated by Tite Kubo. But before you can appreciate his backstory, you have to know that Kubo wrote for each of the Espada to represent an aspect of death. This is shown in chapter 356. Ulquiorra is stated to represent emptiness or nothingness as his respective aspect of death. It is also well known that he is nihilistic, meaning he believes in nothing because he does not find value or meaning in anything, a sad outlook on life which denies existence while ironically existing. Due to the way Bleach was serialized in a weekly magazine, it was impossible for Kubo to include absolutely everything he wanted in the manga. There are untold backstories he has written up that simply didn't make it into the story due to time constraints or being deemed as unnecessary. Ulquiorra's backstory was revealed in Bleach character book 3 Unmasked, which is monologued by Ulquiorra. It begins with the words "not be, but be," 4 words which could be interpreted in many ways. The most obvious being a reference to Hamlet, to be or not to be, questioning the duality and choice between existence and death. However, another way to interpret this is through the lens of Ulquiorra's character, to not exist while existing. In other words, living a meaningless existence. The sadness of being forced to live while you have already stopped existing on a deeper internal level. We learn that Ulquiorra was born in the bottom of a dark pit, where no light ever shone. He questions what is there, over there, curious as to what lies beyond the darkness. The inverted cross on page 2 reveals to us the only source of light surrounded by darkness, which is the moon, but Ulquiorra determines that beyond the darkness there is nothing. The light of the moon exists, but because it is out of sight and reach, he chooses not to accept that it is there, instead believing there is nothing. This philosophy is consistent with his latter interpretations of the heart, which he believes to also not exist because he cannot see it with his own eyes. Ulquiorra continues to tell us about his early life in this dark pit, where there was no light, nothing to contrast against the dark world, no hope or a future to look forward to beyond the darkness. Because he was formed within this darkness, he was uncertain of what he would become. Imagine being born under layers upon layers of dark sediments. We see a figure kneeling in the dark pit, a silhouette of Ulquiorra, who reveals he has a white form, while his comrades were all pure black. He describes their dark forms with shining eyes and exposed teeth. They were eating something, but Ulquiorra didn't have a mouth to eat with. He only had eyes, as he tells us on the next page. Not only did he differ in colour, he also didn't share their appetite, nor did he have the same look in his eyes as them. Ulquiorra's eyes are drawn by Kubo with plenty of emotion, as we see his curious eyes become terrified after he is denied companionship and rejected by this group of hollows. He could not speak to them, nor eat with them. His sadness in his eyes reveals that he would have preferred to have had companionship, instead of resorting to killing them, which we can see he did via his bloody hand on page 6. Ulquiorra tells us that he felt nothing. No, rather what he did feel was the void. In this void he could hear nothing, bite nothing, smell nothing, touch but feel nothing. This void made him restless. He continues to tell us that he had no companion, as he was left to just walk alone. His eyes were his only interface with the outside world. Because he could not experience life via his other senses, everything he saw with his eyes lacked meaning. He then says this poetic character-defining quote, "The things that cannot be reflected in my eyes do not exist." This backstory just gave us the context behind behind why he questions the existence of the heart. He challenges Orihime's belief of the heart in chapter 317 by telling her if his eyes cannot see it, then it does not exist. As Ulquiorra continued to walk all alone and aimlessly, he stumbled upon something extraordinary. His eyes well up with emotion as he describes this white tree he has come across, stating that it has no color, no sound, no scent. It showed no interest in anything. All the tree did was simply exist. Similar to himself, this tree also existed in the void. He merged his body with this great void that was the tree, and found there to be nothingness in there. As his body dissolved into the void, he lost his vision and felt as though everything had disappeared, free from this existence. Ulquiorra found happiness from a void of nothing. This is emphasized as the chapter concludes with Ulquiorra telling us that if happiness exists, then it should resemble limitless nothingness. Nihilism is the belief of having nothing, and thus not having anything to lose. Now if that is not ultimate happiness, then what is? On the final page, Ulquiorra's eyes look intense and fixated. Kubo's art does well to convey emptiness in his eyes, as this special chapter concludes with the words, "There is nothing in you and in me." The words "in you" and "in me" are written in a void of black with a dot of light in the middle. I interpret this as Ulquiorra telling us there is nothing within himself and within Orihime, but that dot of light is the essence of the heart which Orihime helps to share with him. This light within the darkness is his ultimate salvation from nihilism. This dot of light represents the understanding of the heart. The heart is something which cannot be reflected by his eyes, but it does indeed exist. It also holds considerable meaning to the people who acknowledge its existence. This interpretation makes sense to me, as this material was written by Kubo after the death of Ulquiorra in the manga. The dot of light represents the heart, which is surrounded by Ulquiorra's darkness. His realization in the end allows the light to consume his dark inner world. Now that we know his backstory and having an understanding as to why he behaves the way that he does, I want to now explore what makes Ulquiorra a great and memorable villain. The threat presented by Ulquiorra is solidified by his incredible power, as he is on the higher tier of the Espada rankings. In Ulquiorra's first appearance with Yammy, he doesn't really battle anyone, but we learn from how he is observing and commenting on Yammy battling Ichigo, Yoriichi and Urahara that he is not someone to underestimate. He only gets involved in the battle to help Yammy by deflecting a blast away from him. This introduction solidifies that Ulquiorra has more power than Ichigo, as we know Ulquiorra is physically and intellectually superior to Yammy, making Ichigo weaker as he was struggling against Yammy and needed to be helped by Yoriichi and Urahara. The level of threat is well established, as we understand that Aizen has recruited a very loyal and powerful member in the form of Ulquiorra. His motivation for taking action has always stemmed from his obedience as an Espada, as he adheres to Aizen's every order, but because of Ulquiorra's curiosity and patience with his opponents, we see his personality slip through during each order that Aizen requests for him to accomplish. The primary motivation is always to obey Aizen, but his curiosity leads him to personally conflict with Orihime's beliefs and Ichigo's courage. It is his nihilistic philosophy which leads to him being personally invested in the events of the story. Take for example, Aizen ordering Ulquiorra to capture Orihime. The way he orders her, threatens her, and gives her no other option but to comply with him, making him come across as precise and articulate. In chapter 247 and 248, Ulquiorra informs Orihime that her friends have arrived to rescue her, but he tells her to feel nothing regarding it as she is one of them now, and makes her swear her loyalty to Aizen. Orihime and Ulquiorra both interact with each other several times, as Aizen has ordered him to oversee her while she is captured. In chapter 262, Orihime repeatedly tells him that Chad has not died, but Ulquiorra refers to this self-assurance as nonsense, as he tells her that all of her friends that have come to rescue her will eventually die, comparing them to lambs to the slaughter. Orihime bravely slaps Ulquiorra for his cruel words, and it is actions like this that make him question her beliefs, giving more depth to Ulquiorra as it allows us to explore his thought process through his interactions with her. The most thought-provoking interaction between Orihime and Ulquiorra occurs in chapters 316 and 317, when Ulquiorra asks her if she is afraid, as nothing is protecting her now that Aizen no longer needs her. Curiously, he asks her if she is frightened to know that she will die here, alone with nobody by her side. She however replies that she is not afraid as she knows her friends will save her because her heart is with them. Ulquiorra, because of what he experienced in his past, cannot relate to the concept of the heart. He asks her if she really believes her friends will save her. Orihime explains what it means for multiple hearts to beat as one, how she was concerned for everyone but she realized that they too are concerned for her. Despite her feeling sad that they came to rescue her by putting themselves in harm's way, she would have also done the same for them if they too disappeared. She describes the essence of the heart to him, but Ulquiorra questions her use of the term heart, stating that humans toss that word around as if they can hold it in the palm of their hand. He then tells her that his eyes reflect everything. What they cannot prophecy simply does not exist. Ulquiorra shares with her that this is what he has always believed, and it is something that we also know is well established in his backstory. The concept of the heart is so alien to him, he asks if he rips her chest open, could he see it then? Or if he breaks her skull open, will he find it there? Many traditional villains adopt nihilistic beliefs, but only memorable villains use this philosophy as a surface layer to their many layers of deeper nuance and complexity. Studying Ulquiorra, we understand that it is his inability to understand human emotion that results in him coming across as a monster. He cannot relate to this very human concept through which all emotion and feeling are derived from, the heart. Ulquiorra exists with the inability to appreciate what it feels like to exist as a human. Although he believes in nothing himself, it doesn't stop him from questioning the beliefs of others, despite not being able to appreciate or understand their perspectives. Life is literally meaningless to Ulquiorra, so of course it is natural for him to find interest in beings who have come to an alternative conclusion than his own. He demonstrates his belief of nothing really mattering several times throughout the series. For example, how he tries to convince Orihime her friend's efforts to save her are futile, or how he attempted to make Ichigo give up in their final battle by trying to show him true despair through demonstrating the vast difference in their power. I want to expand upon this point by exploring the relationship between Ichigo and Ulquiorra. What is it about their conflict that intrigued so many fans to eagerly anticipate their final battle while Bleach was being serialized over 10 years ago? From Ulquiorra's very first encounter with Ichigo, he determines him to be trash. Even after Ichigo trains with the Vizards, Ulquiorra notices he has acquired a new power when he arrives and interrupts Grimmjow's battle with Shinji. But despite Ichigo progressing with the control of his hollow powers, Ulquiorra still refers to his growth as insignificant. The two of them battle twice in the series. Their first battle takes place between chapters 270 and 272. This encounter begins with Ulquiorra revealing to Ichigo that Rukia has been killed, but Ichigo doubts him and decides to try and save her. Before he can leave, Ulquiorra questions shouldn't he kill him first, but Ichigo responds by telling him he has no reason to kill him, to which Ulquiorra reveals that he was the one who brought Orihime to Hueco Mundo. Ichigo instantly strikes Ulquiorra and their first battle begins. Ichigo activates his Bankai while his Hollow Mask is equipped, which shocks Ulquiorra. He then releases a Getsuga Tencho which overwhelms Ulquiorra, as Ichigo believes he has defeated him, but Ulquiorra survives the attack and begins to beat down Ichigo while advising him to give up, but he refuses to surrender, as he believes Ulquiorra is the leader of the Espada. If he defeats him, then he has basically defeated the Espada. But Ulquiorra quickly corrects him as he reveals that he is in fact the 4th ranked Espada. Ichigo is impaled through the chest as he reminds him that he cannot defeat him, and even if he does, there are 3 more Espada ranked above him. He helps us to understand the impossible nature of Ichigo's desire to save Orihime by reminding him that despite however many times he stands back up, there is no victory for Ichigo here. In their second encounter, Ichigo tells Ulquiorra to step away from Orihime, to which he replies that he intended to, as his orders are to protect Los Noches. He won't kill her until he is ordered to, but Ichigo he will not spare. He states that protecting Los Noches means killing him. For the first time against Ichigo, he draws a sword, which prompts Ichigo to ask him if he considers him as an equal now, but Ulquiorra tells him that he considers him someone who must be destroyed. Their final battle really begins from chapter 340 onwards. The chapter is titled The Antagonizer, which fits well with how Ulquiorra provokes Ichigo throughout their encounter, how both of them act in opposition to each other. He notes that Ichigo has grown in strength and questions if this was due to his battle against Grimmjow, or if he is stronger because of his desire to protect Orihime and his friends fighting below him. Ulquiorra characteristically tells Ichigo it is futile to save Orihime as she is one of them now, another example of him failing to see the meaning in others' actions. The chapters from 341 onwards are titled after the 7 deadly sins. While battling Ulquiorra, Ichigo begins to predict his movements, stating that Espada and leadership through Aizen. His purpose is to follow Aizen's orders. He is not entirely made up of nothing like he was in the past, which is shown to us via the Unmasked special chapter. As we know through our own history, incredibly evil acts were committed due to individuals blindly following orders. This is also true for Ulquiorra. He lacks true meaning, which results in lacking a personal purpose to exist for. At the moment, he is purely living to serve Aizen, which explains why he is exceptionally good at what he does, with no room for distractions. When he is pinned to the ground by Vasto Lorder Ichigo and is about to take a Sero at point blank range, he encourages him to fire it, stating that his life has no meaning now that he is lost to Ichigo, confirming his false sense of meaning that he derived from following Aizen's orders. He failed to protect Las Noches because he was defeated by Ichigo. He willingly accepts his death, encouraging it even. Now that he has failed, the little meaning he did have has gone, so he reverts back to his past self, who has no meaning, not even a false sense of it. He now accepts the ultimate void of nothingness, which is his death. Ulquiorra restores Ichigo's humanity by breaking the horn on his skull, reverting him back into his normal human form. The nihilistic Ulquiorra prevents Ichigo from firing a Sero at Uryu. He had realized that at this point he was already dying due to his organs having been destroyed by the Sero blast from earlier. Despite knowing his death is coming, he still chooses to save Uryu's life, which proves just how much of an influence everyone ended up having on changing Ulquiorra's outlook on life. He then hands Ichigo Zanpakuto to him so that they can finish their feud, but Ichigo tells him that what he was fighting before wasn't the real version of himself. He was unconscious while the monstrous hollow took over him. He asks that Ulquiorra cut off his limbs so that they can fight as equals, to which he agrees. While Ulquiorra fades into ash, he quickly asks Ichigo to settle this by cutting him down, but he refuses. With sadness and sympathy for his opponent, Ichigo yells that he didn't want to win like this. Ulquiorra in his final moments is visibly surprised by Ichigo refusing to finish him off. In a bittersweet way, he muses that even in the end he refuses to listen to him. He reaches his hand out towards Orihime as his final question he asks is directed to her, asking her if she is afraid of him. She replies empathetically that she is not, while she too reaches out for his hand. The final page of chapter 353 shows a black dot surrounded by white space, which is the total inversion of the white dot surrounded by a void of black from the final page of the Unmasked chapter, visually showing us Ulquiorra's realization of meaning. The spot of light is enlarged by his understanding of the heart. He asked earlier that humans speak of the heart so casually as if they can hold it in the palm of their hand. We visually see Ulquiorra realize what this means as he raises his hand and reaches out towards Orihime. He ironically sees her in the palm of his hand, while Orihime's hand also reaches out for Ulquiorra as he turns to ash. We can see him in the palm of her hand. Kubo conveys this realization so subtly. Before writing any great visual story, it is known that you need to convey meaning to your audience through showing them as opposed to telling them. Bleach follows this principle of show don't tell flawlessly. I believe that this is literally the best example of Kubo employing it in this work. To appreciate just how much Ulquiorra changes, we can compare the two poems that Kubo writes about him. In his poem from volume 22, he writes, "There is no meaning in our world, neither is there any meaning in us, the ones who live in it. It is then meaningless for us, who are equally meaningless, to conceive the world in our thoughts, despite knowing there is no meaning to be found." This poem perfectly captures the nihilistic philosophy of the character we see throughout the series. It serves to show us just how little meaning Ulquiorra derives from life. Now let's compare this to his poem from volume 40. "Envious because I have a heart, gluttonous because I have a heart, greedy because I have a heart, prideful because I have a heart, slothful because I have a heart, wrathful because I have a heart. Because I have a heart, I lust for all that you are." The 7 deadly sins once again make an appearance. How I interpret this is through understanding Ulquiorra to be a perfect robotic being. When we compare this to the nature of a human, we realize that we cannot exist without making mistakes, or in other words, sinning. Just as there cannot be light without darkness, or good deeds without sin, humans cannot exist without being flawed. By this logic, pure perfection is a contradiction to a human existence. Upon discovering meaning in his life, Ulquiorra disappears, as if to poetically state that he can only exist in a state of meaninglessness. Ironically, in the end, Ulquiorra becomes the most human out of all the other Espada. The realization of the heart remedies his meaninglessness, but at the same time, this makes him flawed. Ulquiorra was the only Espada to follow Aizen perfectly without fail. His emotions never got in his way, because he was always in a constant state of apathy. He didn't react egotistically to Grimmjow challenging him, Orihime slapping him, or Nnoitra taunting him. He doesn't even get annoyed by Yami's stupidity, but what frustrates him is futile efforts. As we see him yell at Ichigo for not giving up, these futile efforts are rooted in the heart of the people pursuing them, fighting through finding meaning, whether it is right or wrong, in whatever cause that they hold dear to their heart. Humans sin, they falter, they do wrong, they behave irrationally and do things that don't make sense. We exist in a state of imperfection because of our heart, but without the heart, what meaning would we have in our life? Even if that life was a perfect one, it holds no value if we deem everything to be meaningless, like Ulquiorra did. In the end, meaning is given to him through understanding what it means to hold another in the palm of your hand. He fades away while finally understanding how many hearts can become one. Being envious of those ranked above him and feeling inferior are some of the traits of the character I will be analysing in this video. Nnoitra Gilga behaves in a deplorable manner, looking down on his underlings, allowing himself to be consumed by a sense of inferiority and feeling offense when he is challenged by someone who claims to be stronger than him. Nnoitra's dislikable personality and rude behaviour makes him one of the more memorable Espada. His sense of bloodlust complements Kinpachi's similar tendency to enjoy battling out of pure instinct and desire for battle. This is why the conflicts between them feel so exhilarating when they battle with each other in Hueco Mundo. I want to go over Nnoitra's past, his relationships with the different characters in the series, and by the end of the video I will aim to convey my understanding of why he behaves the way that he does during the story of Bleach. Nnoitra makes his first appearance in chapter 229 and in episode 138 of the anime. He has long black hair that reaches past his shoulders. The pupil of his eyes resemble a reptile's eyes. He is often seen with a large smug smile on his face, which reveals his upper teeth. His left eye is covered by an eye patch that is in fact covering his hollow hole. Fragments of his hollow mask are also concealed behind his eye patch. They consist of a set of teeth along with a jawbone underneath them. Nnoitra's clothing is different in comparison to his peers. His Arrancars jacket has a large circular hood extended behind from his collars, along with his chest to the top of his abdomen being exposed. Nnoitra is the 5th ranked Espada. He has been assigned despair as his aspect of death. He gains pleasure from inflicting pain onto others, also displaying prejudice against women, as in the past he was frustrated by Nnoitra being stronger than him, insulting her and holding bitter feelings of resentment towards her as he believes men are superior to women in intellect and ability. He desires to be the most powerful Espada, willing to even attack his opponents if they have already been weakened or injured in battle to assert his dominance over them. He has a single loyal Frachion called Tessera, who looks up to Nnoitra despite the latter always insulting and scolding him. He remains loyal to his leader even after his death, as he is seen lying on the ground on the verge of death himself, shedding a tear for Nnoitra after he is killed by Kinpachi. This Espada is luckily one that Kubo does well to expand upon in the manga, as he writes him with a lot of depth and complexity. Nnoitra has a lot of deep-rooted issues that we see come to the surface. We get to experience how these unresolved issues lead to his inevitable downfall. I want to begin by looking into his past and trying to understand how and why Nnoitra adopts his way of thinking, which causes him to grow feelings of inadequacy that lead to his self-destructive desire for supremacy. Nnoitra's backstory is told during 2 flashbacks. One explains his relationship with Nnoitra and the other details how he defeated her. In chapter 312, we see Nnoitra being asked why by Nnoitra, who questions why he killed a colony of hollows despite not being ordered to do so by Aizen. His justification is that he wasn't told not to kill them. He says that not all the hollows obey Aizen. Those who defy him are rebels who need to be killed for the sake of Aizen. Nnoitra is condescending and looks upon Nnoitra unfavorably for needlessly killing. She reminds him of how lucky they are to be among a few hollows who have evolved to become Espada. He is frustrated by her disapproval and advises her to punish him, but she states that despite being an Espada, he behaves like a child. He charges for her, ironically proving a point before being knocked out by her. She appears to have prevented a hollow from attacking him while Nnoitra was blinded by frustration. When he wakes up, he sees her sitting beside him reading a book. He questions why she saved him, but she says she didn't save him. She simply prevented him from going and getting himself needlessly killed, because he is a valuable Espada after all. Nnoitra tells her that he doesn't like her and assumes she knows this. He then asks her why she continues to follow him. She looks over at him, revealing that she does so because he is weaker than her. The expressive shock we see from Nnoitra in the next panel helps us to understand how much he truly despises being looked down upon and being on the receiving end of somebody else's pity. In chapter 313, the flashback continues with Nnoitra having killed an Arrancars. Still following him, Nnoitra wonders what the purpose is to his battles. He tells her that his purpose is fighting, but she still doesn't understand. She asks why is it that he continues to fight. He reveals to her that he does so because he wants to die. Nnoitra desires to die in battle. This is the reason that he is the way that he is. As long as he can get stronger, then he will be able to fight more. His desire is to eat, sleep, and breathe the sensation of battling. He makes it clear to Nnoitra that if she wants to continue following him, then she needs to understand that he will show no mercy to any of his opponents regardless of who they are. Considering that Nnoitra hates Nnoitra, he's opening up himself to her a lot here. She comments that his purpose is intoxicating and appears to be consuming his very being, telling him that his desire is like a fleeting high. Nnoitra agrees but tells her that there is no finer liquor than water before a battle. He drowns himself in his bloodlust, which is a worthy substitute to drowning himself in liquor. Most people who feel despair resort to alcohol in order to numb themselves or escape from their situation. He explains that for their kind who reside within Hueco there is no salvation. Not even Aizen can rectify this problem. They wander aimlessly in this barren wasteland devoid of life. But thanks to Aizen, Nnoitra was given strength to which he is grateful for. Because of this, he was able to make progress in his skill of battling, and was determined to get stronger than anyone so that he may one day fight a worthy opponent who will take his life out of his body before it hits the ground, who reveals that this is the way that he desires to die, a final strike of intoxication which will rid him of his existence. We see that it was Kenpachi who indeed fulfilled Nnoitara's desire, and I will go into their conflict in more detail later on in the video. Through Nnoitara's character, we are able to understand Hueco more. We understand that those who reside in this world have no real greater purpose in life. For the most part, it is a meaningless existence. This is what we can assume that Nnoitra had come to realize, which leads to his feelings of despair, and his association with this as his aspect of death. Despite all of this, he was still able to find a purpose in his life, a reason that would push him in the pursuit of more strength and power. His intoxicating desire for battle and power is shown through his envy that he directs towards Nelyel, which proves his feelings of inferiority. Chapter 294 begins the second flashback that reveals more about Nnoitra and Nelyel's relationship. We see the two of them having just concluded a battle. It appears that Nnoitra challenging Nelyel has become a regular occurrence. He demands that she kills him at the end of their battle, but she refuses to, stating that she has no rational reason to kill him. Nelyel explains that they once were humans who became hollows, but they regained their sense of reason once they became Arrancars. Nnoitra is frustrated by the way that Nelyel thinks, and tells her that he has a reason to kill her. His reason is that he dislikes her. However, she tells him that this isn't a valid reason, rather it is an impulse derived from his instinct. She then mocks him by referring to him as a beast, stating that she does not recognize him as a warrior. She even says that she would not want to burden herself with his life by killing him. After she leaves, Nnoitra is approached by his Frachion Tessera, who asks if he is okay, but he frustratingly tells him not to get too friendly. His sense of inferiority seeps out as he tells him not to think of himself as an equal to him, just because he was defeated by Nelyel. Tessera asks him why is it that he desires to defeat Nelyel when there are other Espada he could set his eyes on. He reveals that he cannot stand that a woman has defeated a man in battle. He is not recognized by Nelyel, and through defeating her he desires to seek this acceptance or recognition. He cannot reach the heights that she has attained. Nnoitra's Zanpakuto is called Santa Teresa, which translated from Spanish means praying mantis. We learn more about his character traits and behaviors when we study the creepy predator insect that his Zanpakuto is named after. He appears to have a hatred for a female who happens to be the only female Espada, feeling inferior that he cannot bridge the gap between them and allowing the differences in gender to fuel his sense of inferiority further. Female praying mantis perform sexual cannibalism. They are seen to eat their smaller male counterparts after fertilization. In the same way that a male praying mantis is consumed by the larger female, Nnoitra is consumed by Nelyel's higher rank and power. He is destined to remain inferior to her, just as a male mantis is born to be smaller and more vulnerable to a female mantis. Praying mantis have a tendency to creep up on their prey and camouflage themselves and ambush them. We can see this in Nnoitra's behavior when he strikes Grimmjow off guard, and how he eventually defeats Nelyel through using underhanded tactics. The flashback continues with Nelyel returning after a battle with Nnoitra to discover her Frachion are missing. He approaches her and asks if she is looking for something, but she advises him not to wield his weapon in front of her like that in an attempt to look intimidating. She says that it just makes him look pathetic. She advises him to put it away if he wishes to earn the respect of others. Nelyel constantly exchanges harsh criticisms and insults with her fellow Espada. Is she trying to help him or give him reasons to hate her even more than he already does so? We soon learn that it was indeed Nnoitra who had defeated her Frachion and ripped off their masks. As they lay on the ground asking for Nell's forgiveness, she angrily charges at him, striking him, but his image vanishes into thin air thanks to a device created by Szayelaporro, who helps Nnoitra to defeat Nelyel. Taking advantage of her being surprised and distracted, she is attacked from behind by Nnoitra. The attack causes her mask to break, along with making her fall unconscious due to the injuries she sustains. He looks on at her with disgust and contempt as her body hits the ground. He doesn't care if she likens his ambush to the act of a beast. He then throws her body out of the fortress of Las Noches. He says that it isn't their level of strength that separates them, but rather it is their experience. He knows the wound he has inflicted on her will take time to heal, and in that time he will have gained more experience and closed the gap between their strength. He says that he will reach a height so high that her sword will not be able to reach him. In chapter 309, which is titled Pray for the Mantis, we see this visual representation of the heights that he tried to achieve, trying to become that which is higher than the moon. In chapter 295, 35, he looks over the edge of Lost Noches and realizes that Nell has become a child because of the Ryatsu which is leaving her body through the crack in her hollow mask. He laughs at her, presumably feeling like she is the one who looks pathetic now. He does however say that he will miss that their blades will not cross again, as his flashback ends. The relationship that these two characters share is a strange one, a mixture of somewhat admiration and resentment that he feels towards her. It is a complex dynamic that really emphasizes Nnoitra's personality and explains his reason for being. We learn more about Nnoitra's ideology and his reason for being through the poem that Kubo writes about his character in volume 33 of Bleach. We are insects, parasitic worms writhing in malicious constancy, soaring past the moon you look up to until you pathetic creatures are no longer visible. We can infer that the insects referred to in this poem are the inhabitants of Hueco Mundo, who are made to suffer through their boring constant existence, in which they have nothing to strive for. We learn from this poem that Nnoitra desires to soar past the heights of the moon, which is the only object shining light down upon the otherwise dark world of Hueco Mundo. He wishes to soar so high attaining this newfound height, as he seeks for everyone to be barely visible in his sight when he looks down upon them from this new heightened position. Nnoitra's battle with Kenpachi takes place in volume 35, which is titled Higher Than the Moon. This adds to Nnoitra's desire and is once again emphasized by the image Kubo draws in chapter 309 of Nnoitra stood on top of a hill under the blinding light of the crescent moon, which he seeks to surpass. The symbolism of the crescent moon is reflected in Nnoitra's Zanpakuto through its design, which features two crescent shapes, as well as the obvious references to the crescent moon in his released state. You can see the horns on Nnoitra's head resembling the moon of Hueco Mundo, along with his released Zanpakuto, which extends across back to back, forming two crescent shapes from the four blades that he wields. His desire is reflected in his weaponry, which helps him to progress further and become stronger, allowing him to challenge and defeat opponents, which will bring him closer to the moon that he desires to surpass. Nnoitra takes part in one of the best encounters within Bleach during his battle against Kenpachi, who complements and matches Nnoitra's personality through their shared sense of bloodlust and desire for battling strong opponents. The battle between the two of them begins in chapter 298. They both are beasts in their own right, sharing a similar love for battle, wanting to battle for the intoxicating thrill of the fight. Kenpachi cuts down Tessera and sets his sights on the Espada next. They exchange their names and ranks with each other as their battle begins. Mayuri tells Renji that Kenpachi is headed to help Ichigo. He states that when he is on the battlefield, he is like a wolf with a scent of blood in its nostrils. He advises not to get in his way, as it may result in being devoured by the beast. Nnoitra states that the blade of a Shinigami cannot cut his skin, but Kenpachi challenges this notion by striking his blade through Nnoitra's eye patch, which is revealed to conceal his hollow hole. Nnoitra then returns the favor by running his hand into Kenpachi's chest. He laughs at Nnoitra out of happiness, as he realizes that Nnoitra can be killed, and all it will take is to be cut by Kenpachi's blade. In chapter 308, we see the two beasts give off exactly the same energy as they taunt each other. Kenpachi stating that he will cut Nnoitra, as Nnoitra yells he cannot be cut. Both of them share the same sadistic smile. Not too long after they clash, Kenpachi does indeed manage to cut his arm and cut him across the face. It appears that Nnoitra is being bested by the captain, as Kenpachi has gotten used to the toughness of the Espada's skin and has adjusted his attacks so that they are more effective against his opponent. Kenpachi reveals that his eye patch that Nnoitra just removed is a seal that contains his spiritual energy, and he is lucky to still be standing. Kenpachi, looking down at him, forces him to release his Zanpakuto, as he yells that he will never die. In his release state, Nnoitra has 4 arms and wields a blade from each of his limbs. After activating his released form, all the injuries that he sustained earlier have been healed. Reacting to this turn of events, Kenpachi simply smiles and is incredibly excited. Both of them want nothing more than to cut each other down. Now it is Nnoitra who lands a blow in Kenpachi as he is slashed across his body. However, Kenpachi recovers quickly. Kubo depicts Kenpachi's incredible Ryatsu creeping up on Nnoitra as a deathly skull ready to consume its prey. He cuts off one of Nnoitra's arms, deciding that the best way to defeat his opponent is to cut off each of his arms. However, he grows back his severed arm like nothing had happened. He charges at Kenpachi and states that he is weaker than him. He continues to taunt Kenpachi by saying that he is scared, that's why he is running away. But Kenpachi charges at Nnoitra and pins down his arms with his blade. Nnoitra then grows an additional 2 arms which he uses to impale Kenpachi with. Just as Nnoitra begins to say that it is over, Kenpachi begins laughing, which shocks the Espada. It seems that Kenpachi sustaining an injury was the perfect way to motivate him to try harder. His sadistic attitude leads him to demand the Espada to continue. Nnoitra is understandably taken aback by the true beast of the series. Any other beast who dares to challenge Kenpachi ends up appearing like a poor imitation of the sadistic Kenpachi. Their battle continues with them exchanging blows, with Kenpachi appearing to have the upper hand, leaving Nnoitra overwhelmed. The two of them don't let up, and this is what makes their battle battle feels so enjoyable and memorable. They both desire a thrilling battle and are willing to die for this cause. Through his inner monologue in chapter 311, we learn that Nnoitra is confused as he cannot understand how Kenpachi, who has been cut more than him and is bleeding more, is still able to strike back and challenge him with the same level of ferocity as the beginning of their battle. It is like each injury that Kenpachi sustains is only serving to give him more and more strength. Nnoitra's inferiority shows up once more as he tells himself that he is the best and attempts to attack Kenpachi, demanding that he hurries up and just dies. Kenpachi is aware that if this continues, then he will actually die, stating that he doesn't want to die just yet, so he decides to use a kendo technique that was taught to him by their head captain. He tells Nnoitra that a blade is stronger when you use 2 hands to attack with it instead of 1. Now this is genius, as it points out a fundamental flaw in Nnoitra's methodology. He grew more limbs but was still only using 1 hand to attack with multiple blades. He delivers a fatal blow to Nnoitra, swinging down his blade with both of his hands as it almost cuts the Espada in half. He is panting and drenched in blood, trying to stand. Kenpachi is surprised that he is still alive, which is a testament to his incredibly strong will and his desire to be strong. He is kneeling as he looks up at the smiling Kenpachi, who represents the heights which he is frustratingly far from reaching. As Kenpachi walks away, he demands that he waits, stating that the battle isn't over, but the captain tells him that he has no reason to kill a handicapped opponent. Nnoitra says that the battle isn't over then, showing that he isn't handicapped. He charges at Kenpachi one last time. Before his final moments, Nnoitra thinks to himself that he finds it humiliating to have people pity him. He shows no mercy and chooses not to show pity to anyone weak or strong. He states that he would kill his opponents with a single strike, not giving them a chance to come at him for a second time. Before he can complete his thought, he is cut down, falling to his knees. Nnoitra lives up to the description of a beast that Nell prescribes to him in the past, as he faces off against another beast in the form of Kenpachi. We learn more about their encounter through 5 sketches that Kubo draws at the end of chapters 308 to 312. The sketches depict a battle between 2 beasts, who represent the beastly resolves of Kenpachi and Nnoitra. In the first sketch, we see a skeletal beast who is wielding a blade similar to Kenpachi's thin Zanpakuto. The second drawing shows us a beast who has horns which are identical to the crescent-shaped horns that Nnoitra has on his head during his released form. The third sketch shows the 2 beasts charging at each other. We can clearly see here that the 2 beings represent the killer intent of Nnoitra and Kenpachi through the style of blades that they are wielding. The fourth image shows the skeletal beast who now has grown more arms, resembling Nnoitra's released form. It appears that this image shows the beast charging and attacking the horned beast. The final image shows the crescent moon that represents Nnoitra's desires shattering, as the strands of Nnoitra's hair appear to be falling below it. These drawings by Kubo help to expand upon the personalities, desires, and ideologies of the characters. This series of sketches perfectly depicts the battle of the 2 beasts. Nnoitra's released form, which has multiple arms, is in reference to the rebellious beings called Asura, who are mentioned in the mythology of Buddhism and Hinduism. They are superhuman beings who are the opposite of gods, who reside in the heavenly realms. Asura are powerful demons who lack a sense of morals. They reside within the lower realms of existence and are driven by envy and their greed for more power, which is similar to Nnoitra. In the sketches between chapter 108 and 312, we also see Kenpachi's beastly depiction grow multiple arms, resembling a Asura demigod. The fourth sketch shows the skeletal beast taking on this demonic form with multiple arms. Before Nnoitra dies, he falls to his knees and looks on at Nell. As she opens her eyes and says his name, he collapses and dies before his body hits the floor, fulfilling his desire to die in battle at the hands of an incredibly strong opponent. Nnoitra without a doubt was one of the most hated and disgusting villains to feature within Bleach, particularly in regards to his disgusting attitude towards women and his immoral behaviors, especially how he enjoys attacking his opponents when they are caught off guard, willing to even cheat to defeat Nell Yell, that he is so envious of. He even hurt her Frashion, who had nothing to do with his feud with Nell Yell. Despite his horrible personality, he was a fascinating character to follow, and one of the most complex villains written by Kubo. His way of dealing with despair and his desire for power and surpassing the moon kept me invested in his character. His matchup with Kenpachi I felt was genius, and his death was incredibly fulfilling, living up to his feelings of inferiority till the very end, as he was defeated by a bigger beast who embodied the desire of bloodlust more than he did. I enjoyed the appearances of this Espada, as I genuinely felt feelings of hatred towards him, for what he did to Grimmjow, Nell Yell, Chad, and how he tortures Ichigo and makes Orihime watch on. I felt no remorse for him after seeing him die, and felt like him being killed by Kenpachi was the only appropriate outcome to conclude his negative character arc. Grimmjow makes his first appearance in chapter 198 of the manga and in episode 116 of the Bleach anime. His first remark in the series he makes is directed towards Ulquiorra, as he calls him too soft for not killing Ichigo and his friends. Ulquiorra's reasoning is that he did not consider them to be obstacles to him. Grimmjow in his introduction demonstrates his violent nature by stating that if he were in Ulquiorra's position and given permission to kill, then he would certainly have killed Ichigo and the others. From his first appearance we understand his personality to be very cocky, laid back and short-tempered. His laid back nature is shown in his unkempt messy hair, as well as his attire, which is seen through the roughed up nature of his rolled up sleeves and collars which stick out, making him stand out amongst the other Espada. Similarly to Kenpachi Zaraki, Grimmjow also has a sadistic smile, which exudes an aura of aggression and violence. He has a rebellious nature as he shows no respect for authority, not caring for others' ranking or supposed strength. This results in him often speaking his mind, which leads to him coming into conflict with characters with a strong moral compass like Tozen or Ulquiorra. He also develops a rivalry with Ichigo, which leads to some of the most iconic battles within Bleach. This rivalry develops after Ichigo attacks Grimmjow with a black Getsuga Tensho, which leaves a giant scar across his chest. Grimmjow chooses not to heal this scarring so that it serves as a reminder of his feud with Ichigo and his desire to repay Ichigo for hurting him. Grimmjow is the 6th ranked Espada. The remnants of his hollow mask is from a jawbone, which always reminded me of the ferocious and violent jaw of a wild cat. This thoughtfully links back to Grimmjow's backstory, where he spent his past life as a panther-like Adhuchas prior to becoming one of Aizen's Espada, as most of them were Adhuchas in their prior lives, which is the second class of Menos Hollows. To understand Grimmjow's character further, Kubo gives us a glimpse of his past life as Adhuchas. A hollow is thought to have become a Gillian after consuming hundreds of human souls because of their hunger, which is caused by a void of emptiness they feel within themselves. However, under rare circumstances, some hollows become cannibals, and their ravenous appetite leads to them craving hollows as a food source. These hollows, through their desire to consume one another, eventually merge to form a Gillian, which loses its sense of individuality, and what remains is a mindless giant, which holds an enormous amount of spiritual energy. While in the Gillian form, sometimes a personality of one hollow supersedes all the others, which makes up its form. This Gillian develops individuality as this hollow's strong personality takes over the creature. It then begins to consume other Gillians in the same ravenous fashion as before, until it becomes an Adhuchas. In chapter 284, we see Grimmjow in his Adhuchas form, which resembles a panther. When he is about to be attacked by a group of tall Adhuchas and threatened to be eaten, his fear of regressing back into a Gillian causes him to attack the leader of the group. If an Adhuchas doesn't continue to consume hollows, it will eventually revert back into a Gillian, which will result in the loss of their individuality and personality, and they will never be able to become an Adhuchas again. Grimmjow forms an alliance with this group of Adhuchas and leads them as their king, so that they can together achieve the third and final hollow transformation into a Vasto Lorde. Much later on, Grimmjow's group grew tired of their goal upon eating their 3000th hollow. Despite continuing to eat hollows, after consuming their 1000th hollow, they felt no change in their power. They feel they were not chosen to progress with their goal of becoming a Vasto Lorde, even stating that hollows who can become Vasto Lorde are chosen from the moment they become a hollow. Grimmjow calls them cowards and continues on his path without them. Before he leaves, they request that he eats a portion of each of them so that they may forever remain as Adhuchas. Grimmjow was destined for greatness. The king was destined to tear down the cowards before him, to be the strongest so that nobody can look down upon him. In K.M. Weiland's book, Creating Character Arcs, she states that character arcs influence the structure and the theme, even stating that character arcs equal the theme of the story. It is no secret that the underlying theme of Bleach is death. To be consistent with this theme, each of the Espada have their own aspect of death. Now, where Grimmjow is concerned, Kubo wrote his aspect of death to be destruction. It is obvious from how I described him earlier that this perfectly matches his characteristics, personality, and even reason for existing. His character desires to prove his strength by destroying anyone who stands in his way or dares to undermine him. K.M. Weiland continues to state that a character arc is shaped by the lie that they believe, what they want, what they need, and the ghost, which usually is the reason for their belief in the lie that they repeat to themselves. When it comes to Grimmjow, it is pretty obvious that the lie that he believes is rooted in his superiority complex. He has a constant need to display his dominance. We see this early on when he invades Karakura town for the first time and he heads to Ichigo due to his Reiatsu being the strongest. The only person we see Grimmjow respect or use honorifics with is Aizen, due to him being the only one that Grimmjow believes he cannot defeat. Just take yourself back to when Aizen states that Ichigo and his friends have infiltrated Hueco Mundo and Grimmjow tries to leave. Aizen puts the rebellious Espada in his place by using his Reiatsu to pin Grimmjow onto the ground, ordering him to wait for the intruders. Grimmjow is disrespectful to Tozen and Ulquiorra because he thinks he is stronger than them. This is shown when he attempts to attack Tozen right after Tozen cuts his arm off as a punishment for going to Karakura Town without permission. It is Aizen who stops Grimmjow from following through with the attack, otherwise he would have striked Tozen without any fear. The lie that Grimmjow believes is that he is stronger and better than everyone. It may stem from his 6th Espada ranking and his need to overcome his inferiority, or that he really is delusional and thinks he is the strongest. This lie that a character tends to believe is a direct result of something that is lacking in the character's life. Usually this is caused by a past event which causes the character to be the way that they are. In other words, a ghost from the past which results in the belief of the lie. The ghost is usually explained in the form of a backstory, however this isn't always required to create a memorable character, as is the case with the other Espada, but luckily with Grimmjow we do get to see his backstory. We see how he was constantly under the pressure of regression to a prior hollow form, or even being consumed if he didn't maintain his strength. His small panther-like appearance caused him to be underestimated by the other Adhuchas. Through defending himself he proved his destructive strength and earned the respect of the Adhuchas. When the group he was leading decided to give up on becoming a Vasto Lorde, we see Grimmjow refer to them as cowards due to their defeatist attitude. The group believes that Grimmjow was destined for greatness. He was destined to evolve and surpass what they think is possible. Grimmjow's past reveals to us a gifted character who earned his way to the top of the hollow evolutionary chain. Where others failed, Grimmjow continued with perseverance. He accepted the title of king during his backstory because he believes himself to be the king. Anyone who challenges this notion or gives up on pursuing greatness is a coward in his eyes. We see him even declare that he is a king in his final battle with Ichigo, right before he is humbly defeated by him. After establishing the lie and knowing the reasoning behind it via the ghost, we can then see what it is that Grimmjow wants. What exactly is it that is progressing his story forward? Throughout the events of the Arrancars and Huecamundo arc, his story is intertwined with his want to defeat Ichigo. His very first words are his disgust he directs towards Ulquiorra for being too soft and not killing Ichigo. This causes him to go to Karakura Town of his own accord to right Ulquiorra's wrong by defeating Ichigo himself, thus beginning their rivalry and emphasizing Grimmjow's lie of wanting to be the strongest. This is done through Ichigo's refusal to accept the difference in their power and having the courage to attack the king and scarring his body. Grimmjow's need is the opposite of his want. Wants are usually fulfilled through an external physical objective, but a need that a character has is usually fulfilled through an internal realization. Ichigo tells him that he may be a king, eating everything he consumes and destroying whatever it is that is in his way, but what satisfaction would he get if he was alone as a result of his actions? Wouldn't he get more enjoyment out of battling Ichigo over and over again, rather than desiring to utterly defeat and kill him in this one instance? Grimmjow needs to realize his own limitations and overcome his superiority complex to accept that his rival is stronger than him. This is very similar to the rivalry between Vegeta and Goku, the proud Saiyan Prince and the Pantera King. The only difference is that Vegeta eventually grows to accept that Goku is stronger than him, but Grimmjow is not really given an opportunity to come to this realization in this arc. Initially he is stronger than Ichigo, but through Ichigo's training and inherent talent he defeats Grimmjow. This is why Ichigo states that it would be far more rewarding for Grimmjow to battle with him not just once, but repeatedly, as this will truly lead to him gaining strength. The lie that he believes causes him to think that he is the strongest, which is ironically limiting his own potential. Now if he was to accept his limitations and realize that through battling his rival and growing alongside with him, this is what will cause him to become stronger. What exactly is stopping Grimmjow from coming to realize he is not the strongest? Like I just said, it is his refusal to accept his limitations, as well as his tendency to be at the mercy of his own emotions, as he is very reactive and impulsive, oftentimes causing him to be caught off guard. This is the entire reason that he did not evade Nnoitra's attack at the conclusion of the final battle with Ichigo. He was so caught up with his desire to not give up and let Ichigo win, he was distracted. His frustrations got the better of him, which causes him to get caught off guard by Nnoitra. It is his own pride in his own ability which blinds him and stops him from realizing the truth to complete his character arc. Throughout this entire portion of the story, Grimmjow is a very reactive character. He reacts to Ulquiorra not killing Ichigo. He reacts to Ichigo scarring him, thus wanting to kill him himself. He eventually has to face his lie that he isn't the strongest. Now, spoiler alert, when Grimmjow returns in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, he is more proactive, as he chooses to help Urahara and the others by killing the Quincy in Huecamundo. He even joins forces with Urahara and helps him. In chapter 625, Grimmjow finally meets Ichigo once more, but despite helping Urahara, he proves he hasn't totally reformed, as he raises his sword once more for payback against Ichigo. Ichigo. That is until Nell stops that encounter from escalating further. In chapter 626, Ichigo questions why Grimmjow is helping them, to which he replies that if Yhwach destroys Hueco then where else will he kill him? Ichigo agrees with his response and even smiles, which shows that he respects their rivalry. What exactly is it that causes Grimmjow to conflict with Ichigo? What is it about their differing ideologies that causes their rivalry to flourish? Grimmjow holds a grudge against Ichigo for daring to challenge and land an attack on him, despite their vast difference in power. His first encounter with Ichigo proves this, as Grimmjow taunts Ichigo to unleash his Bankai, warning him that if he doesn't, he will be full of holes, just like Rukia, who he swiftly had taken out moments ago. Despite activating his Bankai, Ichigo is no match for Grimmjow, who is not holding back at all. You really have to experience their first encounter, as even the anime extends this battle through Grimmjow repeatedly punching Ichigo's face. You get to appreciate just how badly outmatched Ichigo was here. It is only while Grimmjow is stating his disappointment in Ichigo's Bankai and while behaving superior that he is caught off guard and takes a black Getsuga Tensho head on. Look at both of them smiling at each other in chapter 211. They both are thrilled by the challenge. Even Grimmjow is surprised by Ichigo's attack. Ichigo knows that Grimmjow withstanded his Getsuga Tensho as it didn't cut him anywhere near as deep as he would have liked. Seeing Ichigo's latent ability slip through makes Grimmjow believe him to be worthy to kill. As Grimmjow is leaving, the difference in their power is emphasized, as Grimmjow silences Ichigo, who is yelling for him to come back as their fight isn't finished yet. Grimmjow stuns Ichigo by stating that he noticed the Black Getsuga Tensho puts a strain upon his body, and even correctly assumed Ichigo would be lucky to be able to use it another 3 times, before wearing himself out. He continues to tell Ichigo even 100 Black Getsuga Tensho would be ineffective against him in his released form. His superiority complex shows once more as he leaves after grinning sadistically, while telling Ichigo his name and taunting him by saying the next time he hears his name, he will be dead. Grimmjow defeated Ichigo in their first encounter thoroughly, but it wasn't without a cost. The scar that Ichigo leaves on his chest is a constant reminder to him of Ichigo underestimating him and daring to challenge him. Grimmjow hates this feeling of being looked down upon. When he returns to Hueco after their conflict, he is demoted from the Espada and even has his arm severed, but is unable to do anything to oppose these 2 humiliating acts. During their second encounter, Grimmjow returns, but he is no longer the 6th Espada. He battles Ichigo, who has trained with the Vizards, and thinks he can defeat Grimmjow now that he can control his holomask for 11 seconds. Their exchanges are full of witty banter, sarcasm, and everything that makes up a memorable rivalry. This second battle occurs a month after their last encounter, as Ichigo leaves Grimmjow severely injured due to a Getsuga Tensho that he fires at point blank range while his holomask is equipped. After Ichigo's mask breaks, Grimmjow begins to beat down Ichigo for the second time. In the manga, we see Grimmjow Zanpakuto pin Ichigo to the ground while he plans to repay the favor by firing a Sero at point blank range. Rukia and Shinji eventually come to Ichigo's aid. While Shinji battles Grimmjow, he also taunts him by asking if he has any control over himself, because every time Shinji dodges one of his attacks, something ends up being destroyed. Shinji sarcastically remarks he is thinking twice before dodging them due to the damage that is being inflicted to the surroundings. This remark by Shinji is completely in line with affirming Grimmjow's aspect of death, which is destruction. During their final encounter, their differing ideologies are pitted against each other. As Grimmjow demonstrates how badly he wants to win, Ichigo realizes that Grimmjow wants to kill him because of how Ichigo looks at him. Ichigo even sympathizes with this feeling of being looked down upon. Grimmjow wants to crush anyone who dares to look down on him, through challenging him and questioning his superiority. However, Ichigo answers Grimmjow and affirms his reason to not only defeat Grimmjow, but also Ulquiorra and Aizen too, because he wants to return back with his friends that he has vowed to protect. Losing to Grimmjow is not an option for Ichigo. It is this stubborn persistence which angers Grimmjow, which is the source of their conflict and their differing ideologies. Grimmjow is infuriated by Ichigo, who seems to believe he can defeat him, despite sometimes not understanding how outmatched he is. This feeling of being underestimated by Ichigo clashes with Grimmjow's belief of being the strongest, the one not to be taken lightly. In addition to their personal reasonings, their feud is also deep-rooted in history, as we see from the covers of chapter 279 and 280. They are titled Jugulators, suggesting that their feud is a manifestation of the blood which flows through their veins. The long-standing battle between the Shinigami and the Hollow, which is depicted by their rivalry, suggesting that they were destined to battle each other all along. Despite their feud and rivalry, the two do end up respecting one another, as Grimmjow brings Orihime to Ichigo so that she can heal him before they fight evenly, as he wants Ichigo in his best condition before he kills him. After Grimmjow's brief scrap with Ulquiorra, Ichigo even asks for Grimmjow to be healed so that he doesn't have an excuse after he is defeated. Like a true rivalry, both of these characters seem to have a sort of respect for one another, while also wanting to dethrone the other. For Grimmjow, however, this is far more important than it is for Ichigo, due to his desire to be superior. While Ichigo defeats Grimmjow, he respectfully lowers him to the ground, and even defends him against an attack from Nnoitra. Both of them also complement each other throughout their final encounter, and it makes for a very satisfying final battle. Without a doubt, Grimmjow is incredibly likable and will always be remembered as one of the most memorable villains from Tite Kubo's manga series Bleach. His appeal stems from his impulsive and downright psychotic actions. After Grimmjow was pretty badly wounded due to his encounter with Shinji, Aizen demonstrates Orihime's power by healing Grimmjow's left arm. After his arm is healed, he requests for his Espada number to be healed on his back also, just before he impales Lupi, who replaced him as the 6th Espada. Maniacally, he laughs as he reclaims his position and demonstrates his appeal due to how unpredictable his actions and behaviors are. Grimmjow for me is one of my favorite anime villains, and I hope that this breakdown and analysis does justice to his character. The Monk of Eyes, or a Witch Doctor, are a few terms used to describe the character that I'm analysing in this video. Zommari Rureaux belongs to Aizen's elite group of Arrancars, the Espada. He only really takes part in one battle during the series, but it is enough for us to learn about his abilities and his resurrection. In addition to this, we learn quite a bit about his personality and his deluded belief that he was an equal to Byakuya who had defeated him. So while we see very little of him within the story, let's go through everything that we know about Zommari, including his incredible feats of speed, his loyalty to Aizen, and ultimately all of the things that had led up to his death. Zommari makes his debut appearance within chapter 244 of the manga and in episode 145 of the anime. He is the 7th ranking Espada within Aizen's army of Arrancars. He is a dark-skinned Arrancar with a tall and well-built physique. You'll immediately notice the remnants of his hollow mask, which are arranged in a row of spikes which run down the middle portion of the top of his head. Because of the way that they are positioned, it appears as though he has a mohawk. In addition to this, he wears 2 skull-shaped earrings, as well as a necklace of bones that typically a witch doctor would wear. Unique to him, he also has some tattoos on his face, which consist of the 3 triangle shapes on his chin and the 4 lines that run down the top of each of his eyes. These quirks within his character design aid in him having a very eerie and spooky appearance. And if you thought all of that was strange enough, he also has golden eyes. The way that Zommari has fashioned his Arrancar outfit is similar to that of a monk, and in line with this theme of a monk, his personality completely matches with it, as he is the type of character who prefers to be on his own and to meditate, resulting in him coming across as being very calm and thoughtful, while initially being introduced as this very composed monk-like character. During his battle against Byakuya, we quickly see his composure crumble. He is also pretty condescending when he first meets Byakuya, as he genuinely believes that he is an equal to the captain. Despite his meditative practices, he is a very overconfident individual, and this ends up being his biggest weakness. He had completely underestimated the abilities of Byakuya and had believed that he was superior to him without having seen the full extent of Byakuya's power. Now, while Zommari has some very interesting abilities, his largest failure of all is acting within due time. He had taken far too long to strike Byakuya when he had plenty of opportunity to do so, and despite him stating that he was the fastest amongst the Arrancars, the time that he had taken to strike was also a downfall of his character. When you're up against a powerful captain like Byakuya, the last thing that you want to do is give him time to fight back. Now, within the Espada, its members demonstrate various degrees of loyalty towards Aizen, and when it comes to the character of Zommari, he has a lot of loyalty for him. This is demonstrated moments before his death in chapter 302, where he yells out praises for his leader. So admittedly, Zommari is one of the most forgettable members of the Espada, but in this video we're going to go through all of his appearances now and completely break down his battle with Byakuya. We first see Zommari in chapter 244 when he is sat with all of the other Espada. They learn that the intruders that have just entered into Hueco Mundo were the very group that had invaded the Soul Society. Zommari comments upon there being 4 that had invaded the Soul Society and there is only 3 this time. When he asks who is missing, Ulquiorra reveals that it is Orihime. The next time that we see Zommari is in chapter 269. While meditating in his room, he senses the death of his fellow Espada Aaroniero. We then see him appear on the actual battlefield where Aaroniero was defeated, as he comments upon the last of the first generation of Espada having come to a pitiful end. And while he stands watching over the body of Rukia, he states that in typical fashion Aaroniero didn't finish the job. He comments on how the other Espada are too soft, and that the intruders cannot be left alive, they must be killed. He unsheaths his Zanbakuto and states that there is only one way to be sure, as he intends to separate Rukia's head from her body. He tells the late Aaroniero not to worry because he is going to clean up his mess. But before he can do anything, he is approached by Byakuya. He immediately identifies him as a captain because because of his clothing. After introducing himself and revealing his rank within the Espada, he asks Byakuya to reveal his identity, but Byakuya states that names are irrelevant. If he wants to identify him as something, then he should identify him as the enemy. He then questions whether if Zommari is responsible for Rukia laying on the ground beaten. When he states that it wasn't him but he was about to finish her off, Byakuya's calm expression turns to stern anger. Pointing his Zanpakuto towards Byakuya, he questions whether if something is wrong. Why is it that the captain has yet to attack? He then states that reviving Rukia would be pointless, and he suggests that he doesn't do so. When Byakuya states that he doesn't understand why it would be pointless, and he appears behind Zommari, just as he is about to attack him, a clone of the Espada appears behind Byakuya. About to attack him, Byakuya defends the attack and makes some distance between them. The Espada reveals one of his unique abilities, called Gemelo Sonido. It is a variation of the Sonido technique that only Zommari can use. By increasing the number of steps within his normal movement, he can increase his speed to the point where he can leave after images of himself, and these after images act as clones. We later learn that the maximum number of clones that he can create with this technique is 5, and in typical fashion he uses this technique to distract his opponent and to attack them by surprise. Zommari then demonstrates his overzealous nature as he tells Byakuya that he shouldn't feel ashamed for not being able to track his clones with his eyes, but Byakuya proves that his abilities are no match for him as he lunges towards the Espada and strikes him across his chest, and when Zommari appears behind him, he yet again strikes him against the chest again. Zommari tries to surprise Byakuya by creating yet another clone. The captain is already one step ahead of him as he uses his Hado technique Byakurai to fire a beam through his chest. When the Espada reveals that his Sonido technique can create up to 5 clones, he uses them to encircle Byakuya and to stab him all at once. He bids farewell as he refers to him as a nameless captain. He states that he had lost because he was too arrogant and refused to identify himself. But when Zommari looks closely, it appears that he had only stabbed through Byakuya's captain's coat. Byakuya had evaded the attack when he reveals that he had used a technique that Yoriichi had taught him. He then refers to Zommari as the arrogant one, but he won't defeat the Espada because of his arrogance, but rather because of the vast difference in their power. Byakuya had called Zommari arrogant for the fact that an Arrancars thinks that he is the same class as him. He refers to this as the height of arrogance. Zommari calls Byakuya insolent as he takes up a strange pose, as his head completely tilts 90 degrees to the right as he activates his resurrection called Cursing Eye Monk. His physical appearance completely transforms as he has 58 eyes all around his body. These allow him to target up to 58 opponents. Zommari raises his hand towards Byakuya, revealing there to be an eye on the palm of his hand. While facing it towards Byakuya, the pupil of the eye turns from white to black. The captain, anticipating an attack, appears behind the Espada. Zommari questions Byakuya that he had anticipated an attack but nothing had happened. He tells him that the effects of his ability are already taking place, as a marking appears on the left leg of Byakuya, revealing that it now belongs to Zommari. He states that everything in existence is governed by its rightful master. Subordinates act under the orders of their superiors. The masses live under the rule of the king. The clouds move in response to the will of the wind, and the moonlight is governed by the light of the sun. The Espada states that through his resurrection, he has power over anything that he looks upon. He refers to this power as Amor. Byakuya has a pretty blank expression after the Espada explains his ability. Zommari takes this as him not really understanding what he had just said. He sympathizes with the captain And in one of Byakuya's most epic lines, he throws Zommari's words back at him, as he quotes Zommari as saying that it was pointless to say Rukia, and even when he had referred to the captain as powerless, he tells Zommari that if he wants to see pointlessness, then he should just try saving himself in this situation. Byakuya then fires the blade petals towards Zommari as the building that they are in is completely destroyed. Zommari had hidden himself within a defensive sphere by using his ability El Embryon, but despite this, he sustains heavy injury from Byakuya's attack. After heavily panting, he curses Byakuya, stating that he will pay for what he has done. He attempts to control Byakuya again, but the captain blocks it by using a Bakudo spell called Danku. Byakuya had realized that Zommari's technique is very similar to Kido spells, explaining why the Bakudo spell Danku, which creates a wall that blocks Kido and Hado, is effective against Zommari's ability. When Zommari continues to try and control Byakuya, he appears behind the Espada and points his sword towards his neck. He states that Zommari's frustration had blinded him, and it is embarrassing that he refers to himself as the fastest Espada. In his final moments, Zommari begs Byakuya to have mercy, but the captain is unnerved by his pleading. He questions Byakuya if he is going to cut him. Is he going to execute him? As he yells out that Byakuya is behaving arrogantly. And then interestingly, he starts speaking on moral terms about how the Shinigami slay hollows as if they were vermin. He questions Byakuya whether if they think they are gods. What right do the Shinigami have to slaughter hollows? He asks whether if it is because they devour humans, and if that is the case, then who had assigned the Shinigami as the protectors of the humans? He states that nobody had given the Shinigami the authority to kill hollows, and yet they call the hollows evil and they try to kill them. He yells out that the Shinigami believe that they hold the power of justice in their hands, and before he can finish off his moral argument, Byakuya appears behind him. After having cut him across the shoulder, he questions Zommari as to what makes him think that he was acting as a Shinigami in this instance. On this occasion, the captain had cut down Zommari because he had dared to aim his blade at his pride, which of course is Rukia. Before dissolving away into the atmosphere, Zommari shouts out praises for Aizen, and this is how the 7th Espada is ultimately defeated. We know that each of the Espada were given their respective aspects of death by Kubo, and when it comes to Zommari, his aspect of death was intoxication, and this is of course in reference to his abilities that allow him to control the bodies of others. He intoxicates them and makes them lose control, and if you remember, Zommari had delivered to Byakuya this whole speech about how everything in existence is governed by its rightful master. He gave examples of various things like how the moonlight is ruled by the light of the sun, but it is pretty hypocritical because the things that Zommari controls over, he is not the rightful owner of. So while he tries to intoxicate others, the only one who is actually intoxicated is Zommari himself, as he believes that he is far too powerful than what he actually is. And this was demonstrated by his overzealous nature during his battle against Byakuya. It was like his strength and power had gotten to his head, as he genuinely believed he was an equal to the captain. But Byakuya rightfully stated that the difference between them is like that of the heaven and the earth. So with all of this said, what did you think about the strange but interesting Espada Zommari? Again, he's not one of the most memorable characters to feature within Bleach, but did his appearance leave you wanting to see more of him? I would love to read all of your thoughts and comments about this Espada, so definitely continue the discussion about him in the comments down below. Narcissistic, cocky, and even mad, the scientist of the Espada and the Arrancar equivalent of Mayuri Kurotsuchi is a fascinating character. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down and analyzing everything that we know about Szayelaporro Granz, including his maniacal personality, his unique character design, and who could forget his well thought out techniques and abilities that he utilizes in battle. Through them, he is able to fight dirty and to nullify the abilities of his opponents, and this in a way makes up for his own self-admitted lack of actual compatibility. We see Szayelaporro during the Hueco Mundo arc, where he takes part in one of the longest battles within the entirety of Bleach. He first faces off against Renji and Uryu, but is then ultimately defeated when Mayuri arrives on the battlefield. Personally, I loved Szayelaporro's exchanges with Uryu, as well as his unforgettable battle with Mayuri, which has one of the greatest finales out of any of the battles to feature within Bleach. Despite the fact that this Espada was defeated within the Hueco Mundo arc, he reappears within the Thousand Year Blood War arc as a figment of Mayuri's imagination. It was when Mayuri had subconsciously reminded himself that he was against the idea of perfection. Now in more recent times, the character of Szayelaporro makes a huge return within the manga. In August of 2021, Kubo had released a continuation of the Bleach manga. This special chapter titled New Breeds from Hell features the character of Szayelaporro after he was dragged to hell. We learn that he has actually become a jailer of hell, and through this new chapter he introduces us to a upcoming new story arc to feature within the manga, so there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this character. So let's waste little time by diving into my analysis of Szayelaporro Granz, somebody who refers to himself as a perfect life form and an individual who was given madness as his aspect of death. Szayelaporro makes his debut appearance in chapter 244 of the manga and in episode 145 of the anime. He is a tall and thin-built Arrancars. The most notable feature of his appearance is his shoulder-length pink hair. An interesting fact about his character is that the remains of his hollow mask have taken the form of rectangular-shaped glasses, which gives him a well-presented appearance that adds to his intelligent nature. If you want another interesting yet strange fact about Szayelaporro's character, then check out Bleach Character Data Book 3, where it reveals the strange location of this Arrancars hollow hole. Being the quote-unquote scientist of the Espada, Szayelaporro ends up having a very methodical, intelligent personality. Because of his big brain nature, he thinks very highly of himself, leading to narcissistic tendencies manifesting on occasion. In addition to this, he is a very flamboyant individual, as he makes strange and lewd remarks about his opponents. And while he thinks very highly of himself, he is condescending and treats others like trash. And this is not just limited to his enemies. He isn't shy to admit that he thinks lowly of his allies. And in this respect, he is also pretty similar to Mayuri, who is pretty condescending to others and has a lot of faith in himself, especially when it comes to his scientific work. This Arrancars is literally a sadistic maniac. It leads to him being a very cruel and ruthless individual who sees others as research material, which again is similar to Mayuri. When Szayelaporro is taking part in a battle, he sees himself as an actor on a stage, where his fights feel like theatrical performances for him. And this state of mind is emphasized when he toys with his opponents. You could say that his narcissism has led him to have main character syndrome, referring to himself as a perfect life form who has also been able to attain immortality through his own scientific work, where he is able to reproduce himself in another person's body. So let's now talk about the events that involve his character prior to the main timeline of the story. In the past, we learned that Szayelaporro had assisted Nnoitra in taking out Neliel. He had done this by creating an illusion of Nnoitra which had distracted Neliel. This had given Nnoitra the opportunity to blindside her and to attack her from behind. After she is taken out, Szayelaporro appears, and Nnoitra is pretty rude when he is speaking to him. The pink-haired Espada states that they are comrades after all and they are working towards a common goal, and he wants to see what has become of Neliel after she was attacked. When Nnoitra continues being rude to him, he tells him not to speak to him like that. But Nnoitra mentions a fascinating foreshadowing here when he tells Szayelaporro that he isn't even an Espada anymore. Now this is an excellent piece of foreshadowing for some information that we learn within the light novels. Through them we find out that Szayelaporro was the original 0 ranking Espada, but he had divided himself into two beings, the other being his brother Ylfert, who of course was one of Grimmjow's Fraction. He had split himself because of his dedication to a perfect existence, and while he was in his 0 Espada form, he was unable to control his power, so it is for this reason that he had split in two. This explains why he has such a low rank by being the 8th ranking Espada, despite his intelligence and the tactics that he utilizes in battle, through his various techniques and abilities. Szayelaporro's most significant first appearance occurs within chapter 255 of the manga, when Aizen asks who was it that had sent the Exequias after Ichigo. Szayelaporro appears as he admits that it was him who had given the order. He then immediately falls to his knee and asks Aizen for forgiveness, as he states that because Ichigo was wounded, he didn't want to miss the opportunity to eliminate him, and it is for this reason that he had made the decision to send the Exequias after him. He tells him that he is aware that he wasn't authorized to do so, but he had done so for Aizen's sake. Aizen appears totally okay with Szayelaporro's actions, as he states that as long as he had a good reason to do so, he holds nothing against him. Before the Espada leaves, he tells him that he would have preferred a complete report from him, considering he had extracted information about the intruders from the body of Dodoni. Aizen is already aware that Szayelaporro wasn't acting on the best interest of Aizen, but rather for progressing his own research. Through the way that Kubo draws his squinting eye, you can tell that he is frustrated that he wasn't able to pull the wool over Aizen's eyes here. We see him again in chapter 264, after Renji falls into one of his traps. He then introduces himself to Renji as the 8th ranking Espada. He immediately admits to Renji that he isn't much of a fighter. He elaborates that he is a scientist, but before he can say much more, Renji tells him to stop, as he doesn't want to hear about his life story, because he is here to crush the enemy. Renji then activates his Bankai, but it dissipates into the air as quickly as it had formed. We find out that Szayelaporro has modified the room that they are in. While here, Renji's Bankai has been nullified, as the Espada knows everything about Renji's Bankai, including its shape, nature, and reishi composition. It was through this knowledge that he had learnt from his older brother that he was able to seal his Bankai. The individual that Renji had fought during the Arrancars invasion of Karakura town, Ulquiorra Granz, who was one of Grimmjow's Fraction. The Espada is not acting out of revenge. He reveals that he had placed a surveillance bug on his older brother, and through this he was able to know everything that he knew, and he demonstrates that he doesn't care much for his brother, as he describes him as a box that was carrying around his surveillance bug for him. Szayelaporro draws out his Zanpakuto as he is excited, because this is the first time that he has encountered an individual who can perform Bankai. He tells Renji not to get too hurt because he needs his body intact for research purposes later. They appear to have a battle as Szayelaporro faces off against Renji Shikai off screen. That is until the Espada receives a report that both Aaroniero and Rukia have died after their battle. This of course angers Renji as he attacks him, but it has very little effect. It is evident that Renji is going to need more than just his Shikai to face off against the Espada. After learning about Rukia's condition, he is in a hurry to get to her, but the Espada stands in his way. In chapter 272, we see that Szayelaporro has grown bored with Renji as he summons several of his Fraction. We learn that the Espada are given permission to select a number of Arrancars under the rank of 11th as their minions. He elaborates that some Espada only choose one, others choose many, but for the case of Szayelaporro, he has chosen hollows that he has modified personally. After modifying them, they were turned into Arrancars by Aizen. Just as he is about to order his Fraction to kill Renji, Uryu arrives on the battlefield, and through the character of Szayelaporro, we get to see a very interesting team up, as Renji and Uryu work together to defeat the Espada. After hearing his name and rank, Uryu pretty much underestimates him, as he doesn't believe him to be a threat due to his low ranking number. When Uryu reveals his identity and states that he is a Quincy, Szayelaporro overexcitedly exclaims that it's his lucky day. First he had encountered a Bankai user and now a Quincy. If he was Yami, then he would be howling with joy. But Uryu appears behind him and fires his Zelle Schneider, which pierces Szayelaporro's throat. Now within the anime, this scene is actually censored, as are some other instances involving Szayelaporro's character, but within the manga you get to see the true extent of this attack, as it brings the Espada down to his knees. But similar to how Uryu's Bankai had just disintegrated, Uryu's Zelle Schneider also disappears. He then begins to laugh maniacally as he condescends Uryu, referring to him as a fool, asking him whether if he really thought that his little arrow could pierce him. We learn that he has already studied Uryu's abilities and techniques through his battle against the pre-grown Espada Tsuruchi, and thanks to this prep work he has nullified Uryu's abilities. Uryu tries to fight back but to no avail, and just as one of his Fraction is about to attack him, Renji intercepts the attack as the two team up against the Espada. He seems to be interested in what the two of them can do together, as Renji rushes towards him and wraps the two of them together with his Shikai. He admits that in his current state he is nowhere near as powerful as the Espada, but while he is at this distance he's going to be powerless to react to Renji's next move, as he activates Haro 31, the red flame cannon. It appears to be an explosive Kido spell. Renji appears to be completely unconscious after the attack, while Szayelaporro has survived but he is not unscathed. He refers to Renji as a stupid Shinigami, but Uryu immediately appears as he comments that the Espada likes to look down on his enemies, while at the same time maintaining a distance so he is just beyond their reach. But he is unfazed by his remarks as he comments that Uryu enjoys attacking people from behind, and he questions whether if Uryu really has a trick up his sleeve here. 5 Zelle Schneider appear all around Szayelaporro. He is then shocked, stating that Uryu's Ryatsu should have been sealed, and it appears as though the Espada does not know everything about his opponent after all, as Uryu activates his ability Sprenger. After the dust settles, Szayelaporro emerges, as we see him in a completely battered state. Uryu is surprised to even see that he has survived, but he reveals after all of the data that he had collected, he was able to minimize the damage from Uryu's attack. He then literally eats one of his Fraction while they are alive to heal his injuries, while in the anime this scene is censored, as he converts his Fraction into a glowing purple orb, and he consumes it to achieve the same effect. After pretty much eating more than half of his Fraction, he appears to be completely healed. He reveals that his Fraction are quite unique, because they help him to recover from his injuries after he eats them. This is why they exist. Understandably, Uryu refers to him as a monster, but he corrects him by referring to himself as a genius. He then leaves to get changed, as he advises the two of them to come up with a plan, because by the time that he is back, he will have thought up of the most horrible way to kill the two two of them. In chapter 287, after unsuccessfully trying to escape from him, Szayelaporro reappears. He greets them after having changed his clothes. He explains that he has complete control of the layout of his room, and this is why they had always ended up back in the same room despite trying to escape. He then activates his resurrection called Fornicaras, which literally translates to "you will fornicate." And yet again, another censorship occurs involving his character, where in the official English translation of the manga, his Zanpakuto name is completely changed to the Lustful. To activate the released form of his Zanpakuto, he sips on his own blade as he swallows it whole. This is definitely one of the most unique methods that any of the Espada have utilized to activate their resurrection. In this new form, the bottom half of his body completely transforms into these purple tentacles, as he also has sprouted wings from his back with droplets hanging off of them. After releasing a strange black liquid, he appears to create clones of both Renji and Uryu. These doppelgangers appear to have any limits on their abilities and powers completely removed. While they face off against these clones, they realize that they fight differently to themselves, but Szayelaporro explains that this was done on purpose because he didn't like their fighting styles. After getting rid of the clones, he declares that he will fight them himself, as he is about to show them the true power of his resurrection. host, and eventually it results in the individual's death, which gives birth to a newly renewed version of himself. Now, because of the grotesque nature of this ability, Gabriel, this is censored within the anime, while in the manga it is pretty graphic and grotesque, because the Espada is literally born out of the mouth of Nemu, and her body as a result becomes completely shriveled up and devoid of any life. And thanks to this ability, Szayelaporro states that he has attained immortality and perfection. It's not that he has avoided death, but rather death has become a pathway for him to continue life. Because his existence has become an endless cycle of death and rebirth, he states that he has now become a perfect life form. After telling Mayuri that it is impossible for him to win, Mayuri states that he has an interesting ability as he smiles at him, but he then states whether if this is it. He questions that he has referred to himself as a perfect being, so does he have any other power, or is this the limit to his perfection? He then surprises Mayuri by gaining complete control of his Bankai, as he states that his body invades the nervous system of anything that consumes it. Convinced that Mayuri's Bankai is now at his mercy, he orders it to attack Mayuri. While getting caught up in his own bravado, Mayuri's Bankai self-destructs, as Mayuri had already prepared for such an occasion if his Bankai were to attack his master. He had modified it to self-destruct if it ever turned against him. Mayuri then states that he's going to put an end to their battle, as he claims that Szayelaporro is going to be a test subject for his new drug. This new drug is already in his bloodstream, as he had planted several drugs within Nemu's body, so if she was ever consumed by the enemy, the drugs would also have been ingested. Mayuri reveals that this drug will turn the Espada into a superhuman. It has an effect where it speeds up the senses of an individual, sharpening them to the highest degree. It would slow down the outer world to such an extent that a fired bullet would appear to be hanging frozen in midair. Now that Szayelaporro has become a superhuman, any normal movement will be perceived to be incredibly slow. Mayuri had amplified the effect of the slowdown to such an extent that 1 second will feel like a century. Szayelaporro will perceive reality in such agonizing delay that he will eventually beg for his own demise. Mayuri then moves his sword slowly towards his heart. As his superhuman perception realizes what is happening, his body proves to be too slow to react because it is still at a normal pace. His body will literally be left behind by his senses. This is the agonizing, unique, and incredibly cruel way that Mayuri had killed Szayelaporro. He had made him wait for centuries until his Zanpakuto pierced through his heart. At the start of chapter 305, Szayelaporro has a inner monologue where he is trapped and waiting to die. He claims that it has been an eternity, wondering how many years have passed, as he thinks when will the sword finally pierce through his heart, as he begs for it to hurry and to end his existence. Mayuri then gives his iconic speech on perfection, about how a scientist should avoid it, as perfection means despair for a scientist. It leaves no room for growth or improvement. Now take these examples for instance. When Szayelaporro was consumed by Ashisogi Jizo, he had devised a method for him to start controlling his Bankai, but Mayuri had already prepared for such a weakness, and this is why his Bankai had self-destructed before it could attack him. While on the other hand, when Mayuri had implanted the drug within Nemu and Szayelaporro had consumed Nemu's body to revive himself, he didn't have anything to prepare for the weakness in his ability Gabriel, and Mayuri was able to exploit this in order to win. And Reiatsu like the head captain Unohana, and today they are sending Ukitake, the balance had finally tipped, as it had led to the jaws of hell opening from the inside for the first ever time. But before Szayelaporro can continue, a giant version of Ukitake Shikai impales Szayelaporro and drags him back into hell. Before he leaves, he imparts to Ichigo a question, asking him why is it that the butterflies that the Shinigami use to guide them have hell in their names. This incredible cliffhanger is what we were left with, and it for now marks the final appearance of Szayelaporro within Bleach. But if that one shot was anything to go by, then I'm fairly confident that this will not be the last time that we see him. Through the character of Szayelaporro, we were able to see Renji and Uryu working together for an incredibly unique team up, and he was also perfectly contrasted with his Shinigami counterpart Mayuri. In a battle between the scientists, we got to see what imperfection versus perfection feels like, and ultimately Szayelaporro's big-headed nature and his beliefs about him being the perfect life form was his ultimate downfall. So we're at the point in the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What did you think about Szayelaporro's character? Did you love the battle between him and Mayuri as much as I did? And how do you feel about his return to the Bleach manga during the New Breeds from Hell special chapter? I would love to read all of your thoughts about this very unique and fascinating Arrancar. In terms of numerical rank, Aaroniero is the lowest ranking Espada. This becomes fact after Yammy's 10th ranking magically becomes a 0 rank during the Huecomundo arc, but we'll save that discussion for another video. In addition to this low rank, he is the only Gillian class Menos Hollow out of all of the other Espada. We know that they were either a Ducas or Vasto Lorde rank before they were transformed into Arrancar. It would be understandable to assume that these points would hold back Aarionero's character, but this appears to be far from the case. He is the only Arrancar to have a limitless potential for evolution, and this is because of his greed for constant consumption. Out of all of the other Espada, he is the closest to a Hollow, so he has carried forward the traits of a Hollow into his Arrancar form, so it is understandable to see that he has the primal instinct of a Hollow to devour and to consume. Typically, Hollows do cannibalize each other in order to gain power, but Aaroniero has an ability called Hollow Absorption, and it allows him to devour a dead Hollow and to receive all of its abilities and Reiatsu, and it is because of this ability that I've described him as having a limitless potential for evolution. This sets him apart from ordinary Hollows, and it is most likely the reason why he is the only Gillian class Menos among the Espada, with a unique and disturbing character design and a cunning and ruthless personality. In this video, we're going to break down everything that we know about Aaroniero, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll know everything that you need to know about this character, like how he was able to take upon the form of Kain Shiba, and the mystery behind his unmasked appearance, which are two heads that are encased within a glass capsule. So without further delay, let's dive into my character analysis of the 9th ranking Espada, Aaroniero Arruruerie. Aaroniero makes his debut appearance within chapter 229 of the manga and in episode 138 of the anime. He has quite a unique appearance with his elongated head which is covered by a mask, and his Arrancar jacket which appears to be modified as it has frills and wavy edges which give him a very noble or royal appearance. And when his mask is removed, we see his true form, which is a glass jar encasing two small heads, and it is on these heads that we see the remains of his hollow mask, with the upper head having 3/4 of its head covered by a hollow mask, and the lower head only having 1/2 of itself covered by the hollow mask. He was also able to take up the form of Kain Shiba after he had consumed the parasitic hollow Metastasia. This Espada's ability revolves heavily around his pride that he has for his ability to constantly evolve, and the fact that he has been able to achieve the ranking of an Espada despite the fact that he was a Gillian rank hollow. When he takes up the form of Kain Shiba and he manipulates Rukia, we get to see the true side of his character, as he is a cruel and sadistic individual. He takes pleasure in playing with the feelings of his opponents, and all of the knowledge and memories that he has gained from Kain Shiba he uses to his advantage to make Rukia feel guilty for having killed Kain. He even tells her to take her own life in order to pay for what she had done. He had warped the character of Kain to appear as though he was bitter that he was killed by her. He then corrects himself that she shouldn't kill herself, but instead she should kill her friends to make up for what she did, and his cruel attempt at trying to break the resolve of Rukia would ultimately be his own undoing, as Rukia was able to see through the Espada's facade and realize that Kain would never ask her to do such a thing. If Aaroniero had demonstrated more self-control, and if he was more intelligent with his approach of manipulation, then I'm sure that he would have been more successful and he would have been able to take out Rukia. But thankfully the Espada couldn't help himself and proved that he was very much like a narrow-minded hollow rather than an intelligent and methodical Arrancar, like most of the other Espada have proven to be, with the exception of Yammy, but again we'll talk about that in another video. video. The two heads that make up Aaroniero also appear to have some form of individuality. This is demonstrated in Arraniero's final moments, as the two heads have completely different reactions to dying. The bottom face dies while screaming in agony, as it states that it has been betrayed by Aizen, as he had promised the Espada that he would never feel pain again. This lower head also speaks with a high-pitched voice, which makes me believe that this head of Aaroniero is more childlike and immature, while the upper head has a deeper voice, and upon dying it spouts out curses. When Aaroniero is unmasked, on these two heads we see the tattoo with the number 9, and when he typically speaks, these two heads talk at the same time, as it gives the effect of two people mimicking each other. So now that we've got a solid introduction to his character, let's now go into his backstory, and try to piece together everything that had happened before his first appearance within the manga. In chapter 267, we learned that Aaroniero has a power called Gluttonaria. It's the ability to consume dead hollows and to take their spirit energy and powers. He had consumed the hollow Metastasia. That hollow has the ability for spirit entity fusion, and we know that when Metastasia had fought Kaien, it had fused with his body. So when the hollow Metastasia had died, its spiritual body had returned to Hueco Mundo, and it was at that point that Aaroniero had consumed the hollow and had taken his powers. The very hollow that had possessed Kain Shiba is now a part of Aaroniero, and in turn Kain Shiba's spiritual body now belongs to him also, as it contains all of his thoughts, all of his experiences, and its powers and abilities, even going as far as to being able to utilize Kain's Zanpakuto. Aaroniero first introduces himself to Rukia at the end of chapter 262. He appears before her on the bridge that is just outside of his palace. Originally in his masked state, he tells Rukia to come with him. She follows him into a dark room where he tells her that he has never been fond of the sunlight. Because the sun does not penetrate into his palace, he is freely able to take off his mask and introduce himself, as he reveals to Rukia his name and rank, while removing his mask, revealing the face of Kain Shiba, which completely stuns Rukia. She immediately identifies him as a former lieutenant. Understandably, she's confused as to how he is here. Rukia had killed him that night with her own hands. Aaroniero then begins his facade, as he had recognized her from Kain's memories. He begins behaving and acting with similar mannerisms to the Kain that Rukia had adored and looked up to. Seeing her lieutenant alive and full of life brings tears to her eyes. Rukia begins to think to herself that this is Kain Shiba. She can feel the warmth, like she has just put a hand into the sunlight without realizing it. This was the kind of warmth that she relates to and had felt whenever she was around Kain Shiba. And it's interesting that she says this, because we are aware that the Espada Aaroniero avoids the sunlight. And through what Rukia had just said here, we are aware that Kain is actually the very essence of this sunlight. And this of course is one of the first hints that we receive that this individual is not the real Kain Shiba. He continues to try and convince Rukia of his facade by throwing over a cushion to her so that they can sit down and have a catch up. He lies to her by explaining that when Kain's spiritual body had begun to decay, he ended up being transported to Hueco Mundo. He also states that the hollow Metastasia was one of Aizen's experiments, and when it was destroyed, it was sent to Hueco Mundo to be recreated, since it was designed to do that. But because it had merged with the body of Kain, when it was recreated, it had taken Kain's form. Aaroniero continues lying to Rukia, as he states that the mind that had controlled the body that was recreated turned out to be Kain's. While then joking around with Rukia, he explains that he had taken the place of an Espada and had waited for the right opportunity to exact his revenge against Aizen. He states that Aizen had created a blue sky within the dome that covers Las Noches. Aizen rules everywhere that the light shines upon. He tells Rukia that he is glad that she had found him, because she is the only one that can execute his plan. He then lures her to another room and attacks her. She immediately reacts and avoids a fatal injury as the side of her face has been cut. He comments on how he is pleased to see that she is improved. Rukia is confused as she begins to doubt whether if the real Kain is stood in front of her, but he then proceeds to remind her that it was Rukia that had killed him after all. is that everything that this Espada has been saying has been a lie. He had initially convinced her to enter into the Dark Palace because Aizen rules everywhere that the light shines upon, making her believe that they were speaking in the darkness so as to not be detected by Aizen. Rukia continues to question within her mind why the Espada is not fond of the sunlight. She then binds him with a Kido spell and blows another hole through his palace. When the sunlight shines upon the Espada, it reveals Aaroniaro's true face. We see this capsule-shaped head that is filled with liquid, and within it are two small floating heads. We finally learn about the Espada's true identity, as Rukia no longer needs to worry whether if the real Kain is in front of her now. It appears as though Aaroniero doesn't like his physical appearance, and this explains why he wears a mask to cover himself. The Espada continues to prove that he has knowledge over all of Kain's memories, as he comments upon the Kido spell that Rukia had utilized, as he states that that spell is Byakuya's speciality. While in his unmasked state, the Espada refers to himself in the plural. The two heads state that they cannot utilize their powers within the sunlight, so they have to remain within the shadows. After going back into the darkness, they transform yet again into Kain Shiba. The Espada then goes on to reveal the truth about how he had taken up Kain's form, as well as revealing his power called Gluttonaria. He states that he was impersonating Kain and utilizing his memories in order to manipulate Rukia. At this point, Rukia loses her will to fight, as the Espada unleashes his Resurrection. When Aaroniero Zanpakuto is released, the lower half of his body transforms into a purple mass. It appears to have several octopus-like tentacles, with large red eyes and large mouths also. Aaroniero reveals that the released form of his Zanpakuto is a physical manifestation of all of the hollows that he has consumed. His Zanpakuto Gluttonaria can utilize the abilities of all of its victims at the same time, as Aaroniero reveals that he has consumed 33,650 hollows. After she loses her will to continue fighting, Rukia is impaled by Aaroniero's Zanpakuto. When Rukia regains her resolve and realizes that the real Kain was never in front of her, and after he had died, he had imparted himself into the hearts of all of those people who had loved him through the various memories that they had shared together. It is when Rukia remembers that Kain lives on within her heart that she grabs the Zanpakuto of the Espada. Aaroniero, realizing that she is still conscious, commends her efforts. When Aaroniero mocks Rukia that her Zanpakuto has been broken, she reveals the third dance of her Zanpakuto, as her blade reforms and impales the head of Aaroniero. After the glass capsule shatters and the liquid pours out, we see the differing reactions of the two heads, as the lower head screams out that it cannot breathe, as it pleads for Aizen to save it. After yelling out in frustration, it eventually cracks, while the second head curses its predicament and breaks in two, and this serves as the end to Aaroniero's character. While pretending to be Kain Shiba, he was grateful that he was the one who had come across Rukia, and it was thanks to this encounter that we got to see the sadistic and manipulative nature of this Espada, and through his ability how he was able to have a psychological edge over Rukia. Aaroniero is a pretty fascinating character, in the sense that he has three sets of powers. His own Arrancars ability, which of course is to consume hollows and absorb everything that they have, and the second is the power of every single hollow that he has ever consumed, and the third aspect to his powers is that he can access all of Kain's abilities as a Shinigami, and we see him utilize these three aspects of his abilities during his battle against Rukia, as we quickly understand why he was made into an Espada, despite all of the things that were holding him back, in particular the fact that he was a Gillian class Menos. When hollows are typically transformed into Arrancars, they are given Shinigami powers, but Aaroniero is yet again an outlier, in the sense that he can control the pure Shinigami powers of Kain Shiba. He was quite fortunate that he had consumed Metastasia, albeit at the right time while the hollow was still fused with Kain. We are aware that Kubo had given Aaroniero greed as his aspect of death, and this perfectly complements his ability to evolve continuously. He has no reason not to continue devouring hollows, so that he can not only gain more power, but also gain all of the hollow's abilities and Reiatsu. If Aaroniero wasn't killed, then there is no doubt that he would have continued evolving. Within his lifetime, we know that he had consumed 33,650 hollows, and this should be a testament to the amount of greed that he has, and it is in line with his aspect of death. And it also complements the name of his Zanpakuto, Gluttonaria, because those who are typically greedy also manifest traits of gluttony. So through Aaroniero's character, Rukia was made to face the guilt that she feels regarding Kain's death, and through their encounter she finally got some much needed closure. After she remembers the words of Kain, she accepts that her enemy is an imposter, and to honor her lieutenant's memory, she needs to take out the imposter who is using his body. It was an iconic battle with a tragic ending. Through the climax of their encounter, we were able to see the third dance of Rukia Zombokdo, and we were able to see the true form of Aaroniero. Behind that cunning and ruthless personality were two cowards. They were afraid of showing their true selves, so for that reason they were hiding behind a mask. In the end, Aaroniero ends up being another very uniquely designed character, one that is very rich with characterization, and despite him being one of the weaker Espada, we get to learn what actually sets him apart from the others, and why he is unique in his theme of evolution and his theme of greed and gluttony. It would have been interesting to see Aaroniero survive, and to see where his limitless evolution would have taken him, but ultimately his primal hollow instincts, and the hasty method through which he had revealed his true motives were his ultimate downfall. So we're at the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What did you think about the character of Aaroniero? Has this video, funnily enough, helped to shine a new light onto this character? Or do you perceive him as an uninteresting and weak villain? I would love to read all of your thoughts, so definitely continue the discussion in the comments. Yammy Llargo is one of the first Espada that we see within this series when he arrives in the world of the living with Ulquiorra. They were carrying out a reconnaissance mission in order to evaluate whether if Ichigo was a risk to Aizen's plans. Through this introduction, we learn that Yammy is a outspoken, hot-headed individual. Yammy was initially perceived to be a low-ranking Espada, but it is later revealed that he is actually the zero-ranking Espada. There is controversy surrounding this character, and I have my own personal opinions regarding it, and it's about how he was defeated off-screen, and this change from the 10th rank to the 0 rank, after Yammy activates his resurrection, and it becomes evolved because of his rage. We get to see just how incredibly powerful he truly is. But despite all of this build-up and this transformation, Yammy was ultimately defeated off-screen. So in this video, I want to talk about everything that we know about Yammy's character, as well as going over these controversial points and giving my opinion on them. So without further delay, let's dive into my character analysis of Yammy Llargo, the Espada who was given rage as its aspect of death. Yammy makes his debut appearance in chapter 190 of the manga and in episode 113 of the anime. He is the largest out of all of the Espada. He has red markings under his eyes, orange eyebrows, and the remains of his hollow mask are a jawbone, which consists of 8 teeth. He has a tattoo of his Espada rank on his left shoulder, and when he activates his released form, the 1 disappears, leaving just a 0. Yammy tends to get bored very quickly, especially during battle, and it is for this reason that he tries to get as much enjoyment as possible from killing and crushing those who are weaker than him. And as demonstrated when he had first arrived within the world of the living with Ulquiorra, he tends to take part in battle without any real strategy. He throws around his brute strength, hoping to land an attack on his opponent. Now, what I find strange is that Yammy was promoted from the 10th ranking Espada to the 0 rank, when it is evident that he respects characters like Ulquiorra and treats them with a sense of seniority. Yammy was also unable to use Pesquisa, and as a result, he was unable to determine the strength of his opponents, or whether if they were even worth fighting, and it is for this reason that he had continued to ask Ulquiorra for input, asking him whether if the opponents who had confronted them were trash or not. Yammy is a pretty brutal character, and he treats the other Arrancars around him as trash, and this is demonstrated when his arm is healed within Hueco Mundo, and he immediately kills the medic who had attended to his injury just so that he could test the strength of his reattached arm. We don't really know anything about Yammy before his first appearance within the manga, where he voluntarily chooses to accompany Ulquiorra to the world of the living in order to gather information on Ichigo. When the Espada first arrive, they create a large crater. This gets the attention of passers-by who gather around it, and Yammy assumes that they are looking at him, but he is unaware that ordinary humans cannot see spiritual beings. Feeling like he is being watched by pests, he begins to suck out the souls of all of the humans nearby. When Chad and Orihime arrive to face off against Yammy, Yammy brutally beats Chad, and this entire encounter is censored within the anime, but within the manga you get to see how gruesome Chad's injuries were, as well as how badly beaten Orihime was. And in addition to this, the graphic nature of Yammy's arm being severed when Ichigo arrives to assist them. Yammy is actually the first Espada that we see taking part in battle. He is initially losing his battle against Bankai Ichigo until his inner hollow starts to take over. It is at this point that Yammy takes the upper hand, as he repeatedly punches Ichigo. We of course know that Urahara and Yoriichi appear to assist him, and they prove that Yammy is no match for them, as they easily deflect his attacks. And before they can really hurt Yammy, Ulquiorra intervenes, as he swiftly strikes the Espada in his stomach, forcing him to retreat. The two of them end up returning to Hueco Mundo, as they conclude that Ichigo is not a threat to Aizen. While in Hueco Mundo, Yammy has his arm reattached, and he later returns to Karakura Town with Grimmjow, Loopy and Wonderwise. During this second invasion of Karakura Town, Yammy faces off against Hitsugaya, as they speak about how Hitsugaya is the 10th captain while he is the 10th Espada. While battling him, Yammy is able to break the ice of Hitsugaya's Shikai. He later unleashes a surprise attack upon Urahara, which thankfully doesn't have much of an effect on him, and this does confuse Yammy, but Urahara explains that he has been switching with a portable gi guide that he has on him in order to avoid any serious injury. This of course angers the hot-headed Yammy, as he assumes that Urahara is looking down on him. Before their battle can continue, Yammy is returned to Huecomundo by a Negation beam. Now the Espada doesn't do much during the Huecomundo arc, aside from being informed that Ichigo, Chad and Uryu have invaded Huecomundo. He makes some remarks and complains about the intruders with Aaroniero, Szayelaporro, Nnoitra and Baraggan. We learn that when Yammy isn't taking part in battle, he typically eats in order to replenish his strength so that he is ready for his next encounter. And we see this in chapter 342, where he leaves his palace after eating and he finally decides to take action against the invaders of Las Noches. He appears during Ichigo and Ulquiorra's final battle, as he asks Ulquiorra to allow him to fight Ichigo, but Ulquiorra refuses his assistance as he tells Yammy to either go back to sleep or to face off against the other invaders. He then notices Orihime stood beside Loli and Minoli. He successfully knocks Minoli through a wall, and as he is about to kill Loli, she releases a Zanpakuto, but Yammy is able to defeat her with ease. When his attention turns towards Orihime and he's about to kill her, Uryu arrives. He fires a Quincy arrow at his shoulder which manages to knock down the oversized Espada. However, Uryu's arrows are unable to pierce through Yami's hardened skin. When he is about to attack Uryu, he triggers a anti-Arrancars landmine, which Mayuri had given to Uryu. Uryu had planted these landmines on the ceiling of the floor below. It results in Yammy falling through all of the lower pillars below him, as he falls right to the floor of Las Noches. In chapter 352, we see him emerge from the desert of Las Noches. He then interrupts Rukia's battle with Rudburn, and he also notices Renji and Chad nearby. While he is on the ground, he is able to sense the increase in Ichigo's Reiatsu, and he also senses Ulquiorra's Reiatsu fading away, and it upsets him that he wasn't able to finish off Ichigo himself. Renji then goes on to state that Yami's Reiatsu is the weakest out of all of the Espada, but when Yammy releases his Zanpakuto, his number 10 tattoo transforms into a 0, as he reveals that the Espada rankings do not run from numbers 1 to 10, but rather from 0 to 9, and he is in fact the strongest out of all of the Espada. Now I personally feel like this change was far too forced and really unbelievable in my opinion. In terms of brute strength, Yammy may well be the strongest, but in terms of tactics and strategy, he falls far below the likes of other Espada like Szayelaporro, Nnoitra and even Ulquiorra. But what do these Espada rankings mean anyway? Since Ulquiorra was the 4th ranked Espada, but he was the only one with a second resurrection out of all of the other members. While in his release state, Yammy easily takes care of Chad and Renji, and he manages to apprehend Rukia. When he throws her to the ground, he is surprised to see that Ichigo has appeared and has saved her. When Yammy charges a Saro, it ends up exploding in his face as Ichigo fires a Getsuga Tensho towards him. It is at this point that he blindly starts punching on the ground. He is not even looking at where he is attacking, hoping that he is going to hit Ichigo somehow. While he is battling Ichigo here and he reveals to him his 0 ranking tattoo, he states that he views the other Espada as trash, but Ichigo isn't really bothered by how strong Yammy is because he is still going to defeat him, and he is rather disgusted by the lack of respect Yammy shows towards his comrades. When Ichigo struggles to summon his hollow mask, he is grabbed by Yammy, but it is then that their battle is interrupted by the arrival of Byakuya and Kinpachi, and it is through Yami's character that we see this fascinating team up between these two unlikely captains. Now most of the battle between Kinpachi, Byakuya and Yammy occurs off screen, and we cut back to it here and there, like in chapter 382. When the two of them begin to grow tired of battling against an opponent as weak as Yammy, Kinpachi tells Byakuya to finish him off, as the two of them start to argue over who should defeat the Espada. This of course angers Yammy. He ends up firing an incredibly large Saro towards them. This motivates the two captains to work together to take the Arrancars down, but Yammy appears to have survived the attack, and he grows even more angry, which results in his body increasing in size and his resurrection actually changing in form. He tells Kinpachi and Byakuya that making him angry is the last thing that they want to do, as he reveals that he increases in strength the more angrier that he becomes. In chapter 383, we see Yammy taunting Byakuya and Kinpachi sacrificed all of his other faculties and relied completely on rage in order to boost his strength. But without an ability to think rationally and to strategize, all of that strength amounted to nothing in the end. Another interesting point is about his evolved resurrection, which is probably the closest thing to a second resurrection that we see from the other Espada, as we know that Ulquiorra is confirmed to have the only second resurrection out of all of the other members. Now, Yammy isn't the most deep or well-written character to feature within Bleach, so there isn't much symbolism to draw upon. He is simply a really powerful guy who represents rage and anger. I think if Kubo would have given his final battle a bit more importance, then I would have cared about Yammy a bit more, and his transition from the 10th ranking Espada to the 0 rank would have been more believable. And in the end, Yammy ends up being a character who I would even go as far as to say doesn't have wasted potential, because he is very consistently written from his first to last appearance. So what more is there to expect from him? He had several lackluster encounters within the series. He was schooled by Ichigo and then by Urahara, and he was ultimately humiliated by Kinpachi and Byakuya, who saw him as nothing more than a nuisance. So with this video completed, I've spoken about all 10 of the Espada members, and it's unfortunate that we're not really ending on a high here, but regardless, after having made videos on each of the members of the Espada, I've grown to really appreciate them far more than I did all those years ago when I'd first seen them within the anime. I think Kubo employs a lot of subtle writing when it comes to the Espada, and a lot of it isn't spoon-fed to us. And after reading through every appearance of each of the members of the Espada, I've grown to really appreciate the style of Kubo's writing, and how he not only creates fascinating character designs, but he also gives them believable personalities and consistent characterization. And this is why the Espada members perfectly fit into their respective aspects of death that he has assigned to them. So yeah, this was my video on Yammy Llargo, and we're at the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What did you think about the 10th ranking Espada who had transitioned from being one of the weakest Espada to the strongest? Do you agree or disagree with my criticisms? I would love for all of you to continue the discussion in the comments. And lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I can't wait to see you in my next Bleach character analysis video. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.